the event is now live. John, please take it away.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's online summit, Enterprise Disaster Recovery in 2022 and Beyond. Today's event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine and Virtualization and Cloud Review, who have brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topic. Many thanks to our sponsors, Kaosoft, Island, and Metallic, for making this event possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get started, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsors, Kaosoft, Island, and Metallic, have provided some extra resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the third session, one lucky attendee will be receiving Microsoft's latest 2-in-1 hybrid laptop, the Surface Pro 8. But you must be present to win, so stick with us till that third session. Now let's get started with our first session, why disaster recovery will matter even more in 2022. For this session, we've called on technologist, content creator, and senior resultant Howard M. Cohen. In his 35-plus years in the IT industry, Howard has held senior executive positions in many of the top channel partner organizations, and he currently writes for and about the IT channel. Howard is a sought-after speaker, an insightful observer of the technology landscape, and he's definitely one of our favorite presenters. You are in for a great session. Take it away, Howard.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Always enjoy hearing you talk about me. I get to see now which of my slides work and which ones don't. This is a slide of the Earth that it's actually supposed to be spinning, and then it blows up. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be working, so just try to use your imagination. But I wanted to start off by kind of talking about the nature of disaster, because I think in the last year or two, we've seen the whole nature of what we call a disaster change, grow. This is the world blowing up. It's not that severe, but we certainly have seen, and this was a wonderful motion video of an earthquake. But we've seen earthquakes, we've seen tornadoes rip through. We've seen more and more hurricanes than we've ever seen before. We've also seen plenty of floods, and we're seeing more and more floods, and we can expect to see more floods. These are all disasters. Another disaster, yes, this is certainly can be considered a disaster, but I was really thinking more about this. This is a disaster that clearly was man-made. And while we can still characterize the floods and the tornadoes and the hurricanes and so forth as natural disasters, more and more the nature of them is that they are caused by the actions of human beings. So I'm suggesting that tomorrow's disasters are going to be more and more made by us, by people. And we are far more devious and far more destructive than nature has ever been. And so one disaster that we've encountered in the past year or two that we can debate whether it was man-made or naturally occurring was, of course, COVID-19. Some say it was caused by interaction between bats and humans. Some say it was created in a laboratory. Well, we may never know. The fact is, though, that it was a global disaster and still is. It's still a disaster for many people who are working from home. Some are finding it wonderful and others are finding it challenging. the financial challenges, the challenges in avoiding distractions and so forth. It's been difficult for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But in recent interviews that I've been doing with companies that have made these transitions, one of the things that keeps popping up is that companies talk about how they were very fortunate that in March 2020, when COVID actually started, it helped that they were pretty well transitioned over to the cloud, that they had cloud computing working for them, doing its job for them, and therefore they were able to get everybody working from home much faster. It was a much smoother transition, and they've had the opportunity to improve upon that in the ensuing 2 years. I noticed that none of my builds are working either, so please bear with me. But we've seen natural disasters, although more and more of them are being made by us. We've seen extremist disasters, if you will. More recently, we've seen data disasters, and we're starting to see cloud disasters. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what does a cloud disaster exactly look like. And so to start off with that, I decided to show the map of locations for Amazon Web Services. These are all the server locations that Amazon has, the connections, and how they're all, this is what their network looks like. And they achieve resilience, preventing disaster, through redundancy. You know, back in the old days, if you wanted to have redundancy, you could buy a second server and make it a duplicate of your primary server and run software so that if something went wrong in the server, a drive failed or what have you, drive array failed, it would fail you over to the other server, the duplicate server, the redundant server, if you will, and you would just continue working and as if nothing had happened. It was pretty imperceptible. It's pretty good. But of course, when you get larger, you can't just duplicate a server. And people found themselves at the place where they were actually duplicating data centers. They were actually building redundant data centers that basically sat there quietly replicating data, but nobody was using them most of the time until something went wrong. The cloud, to a great extent, has superseded that. In the cloud, if you're on Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud, if you're on any of them, you have a primary server assigned to you, but your data is also being replicated on another data center and another beyond that, and probably a few more. If your whole data center goes down for some horrible reason, you're failed over to another data center. And so you just keep on working. That's good. That means that we're better protected against certain kinds of disasters because we are more resilient. Of course, if all the data centers that your data is replicated in all go down, we probably have a bigger problem on our hands. We're not so much worried about our data. This is a good development for us. Cloud has helped make it possible to achieve greater resilience through redundancy. And of course, many companies are still putting in their own data backup through other means because they want a belt and suspenders approach. They want to know that even if the cloud disconnects from them, they still have their data. And that's a good idea. Okay, so that's the environment that we've seen. I'd like to talk a little bit now about disaster recovery because we're asking why disaster recovery will matter even more. What does disaster recovery look like? And, you know, I've helped a lot of clients over the years build disaster recovery plans or improve their disaster recovery plans. And one of the things that always frustrates me is that the first item isn't get people to safety. It's part of your disaster recovery plan. Where does everybody go? How should they get out of the building? How should they get to safety? Once they're in safety, what should they do? Who should they contact? Who has to do what? What services and systems have to have attention paid to them. By whom? None of those are digital, but they're all part of your disaster recovery plan. And now more than ever, they're very important to think about. Where is everybody going to go? Once you have them safely tucked away somewhere, then you can start thinking about getting them access to their resources. If you have a replicated data center, you want to connect to that. If you don't, you want to tell them, here's where you're going to connect to get your data. Beyond access to resources, though, there's also the concept of access to other people. And this is something that often gets left out. But the communication between people is a critical part of keeping any business working. And so you need to pay attention to how they're going to communicate with each other. And you usually have to have more than one choice. You don't know what's going to be unavailable. So you want to have a wired choice. You want to have a wireless choice. I know the Associated Press has a satellite-based choice. They have 19 different ways to communicate with each other. Obviously, they're in the communications business. But the point remains that we need to have redundant communications networks available to us to communicate with each other. Once you've got everybody working together, once you have everybody gaining access to what they need to keep working, you need to pay attention to establishing a data center. And in the old days, that would mean maybe failing over to a data center. Or it might mean renting space in a co-location facility and building something so that people could get at their data. Of course, the data isn't there until you restore your last known good backup. And hopefully it's not too old. I've had clients whose most recent backup was 6 months old. That was a horror show. It needs to be less than a day, if possible. So you restore your last known good backup to your data center, and then you resume operations. Now you're back up and running, and people can continue working from wherever they are. And this is really pretty much where we are today with COVID. Everybody is somewhere working from home or from some other facility, and they're all connecting to their resources. They're all connecting to each other. They're all collaborating and communicating, and they're waiting to see what happens, when it's time to consider returning to the office. We had a presentation recently talking about that decision-making process. Who stays home? Who goes back to the office? Who shuttles back and forth between the two? Lots to be thought about there. Ultimately, we will resolve those issues. Some companies will never go back at all. People will always work from home. Other companies, people will always work back to the office. Other companies, somewhere in between. Okay, so that's what it looks like in a classic disaster recovery mode. Of course, with the cloud, we're a little more fortunate because we don't have to establish a data center or restore that last known good backup. We simply fail over to the other data center and off we go. And remember, the cloud consists of data centers, many of them. And so we're just taking the data that we had in our primary data center, and we're failing over to the data that's in a secondary data center. And you would not believe how many people still don't know that the cloud is made up of data centers. Okay, so now we need to talk about security. Security is probably the biggest concern. How do we keep everything secure? And here's why it's a concern, okay? What we're looking at is a typical office complex, 2 big buildings in a big city, in an industrial park. And this company happens to occupy both of these buildings. And this is their threat surface. This is their total threat surface. They have to monitor the area around these 2 buildings to see threats coming before they get there. And that's reasonable. I mean, this is a threat surface that can be fairly well monitored, and they can get pretty preemptive in protecting it. With COVID, this changed. And now the threat surface looked more like this. Yes, that is New York City. It's the only photo I could find where actually they depicted more than one borough. But you're looking at in the middle at downtown New York, where everybody's threat surfaces used to be. And now they've all moved out into the boroughs, into the suburbs, and where their homes are. And so everybody's in their home. Excuse me. Each home has become part of their threat surface, the company's threat surface, because the company has to protect everywhere that the network occurs. And so you have people at home on residential internet, in some cases using home computers that aren't terribly well protected. And there is some corporate IT manager who's responsible for making sure nobody gets into any of them to get at the network and get at the resources. That is a horror show. And many network managers have been challenged to figure out how to do this. There are many solutions. I think some of them will be discussed in the next two sessions. I will leave that to them. For those of you who are wondering if this is a network diagram, this is actually the New York City subway system that's being depicted. Okay, so we've looked at the environment for natural disasters and man-made disasters and how that's changing over time. Now it's time to look to 2022, to look into the future and see what we can expect. And so to do that, I've got my magic crystal ball. And in my magic crystal ball, the first thing that's coming up and showing itself to me is misinformation. Misinformation is probably the most prevalent disaster in our environment, in our population, in our world. Misinformation is rampant. It's everywhere. And unfortunately, there are all too many people who are falling victim to it, who buy into the craziest things. And some of them are getting violent. That makes this the biggest disaster that confronts us. We can each fight it by reminding people that that isn't true, this is true, by participating in broadcasting the truth and maintaining the truth to the best of our abilities. But this is one that we're going to be recovering from constantly for a long time to come, and I think we need to be aware of it. It will impact our companies. It will impact our businesses, and we need to think about how we combat that. Malware, nothing new here. Viruses, Trojans, worms, you name them, they're out there, and they're proliferating, even more today than ever before. The 400-pound guy on his bed has more time on his hands and is creating more horrible malware to inflict upon people. And we haven't even seen the worst of it yet. But malware attacks will certainly continue on into 2022 and well beyond 2022, let's face it. Another kind of attack that we'll see more of is the direct denial of service attack, or a DDoS attack. This is an attack in which a cybercriminal basically enlists a large number of computers by invading them, by connecting into them, and has all of those computers make requests of a specific target, a specific computer that they want to attack. And so now you have all these computers, thousands of them, attacking this one host, and the host can't keep up. And so it shuts down. It's unable to take real requests anymore. It's literally out of service. And that's why we call it a direct denial of service. It's directed by some bad actor, and it's insidious because it's coming from everywhere. It brings whole data centers down, and it's not going away. There's all kinds of protection against it. Recovery from it is difficult. You have to get it to stop first. But we will continue to see more DDoS attacks as we go forward. Another prevalent kind of attack that we're going to see more of is the insider attack. You know, people think that the bulk of attacks are coming from outside their firewall, and they are wrong. It's been estimated between 60% and 85% of attacks actually come from within the network. Somebody on the inside, either accessing data they're not supposed to, stealing data from their company, making data available to outsiders. You name it. There's all kinds of insider attacks. They're going to continue. Disgruntled employees, sometimes they happen by accident, inadvertently. People don't mean to do it, but they do something that causes an exposure. It requires more attention than we pay to our external attacks, and yet most companies spend a whole lot more protecting themselves from the outside than they do from the inside. As we move forward, as people's times become more desperate, we may see this grow substantially. So keep your eye out for your insider attacks. The next slide says remote worker attacks, and remote worker, if I meant that they were attacking the corporate network, I would have just included them in insider. But what I'm saying is that a lot of bad actors have come to realize that people working from home are working on residential internet, probably a home computer, and they're not protected very well. So just like Windows XP at the end of its support life, it's become the favorite target of every malactor in the environment. They all know, let's go after these guys who are working from home. We'll find them, we'll attack them, and we'll go through their connection into their corporate network and get at their corporate resources. This is prevalent. This is happening even today. And the solution to it is to extend your corporate defense strategies to your home users. SASE is one possible way to do that. There are many others, and hopefully you'll hear more about them later. But be aware that every remote worker you have represents a point of vulnerability, just like a mobile device. And a lot of them are using mobile devices. So let's spend some more time thinking about how do we prepare ourselves for this onslaught that's going to continue getting worse. Some of the attackers have changed. We see more and more attacks coming from outside our country. Attacks coming from Russia, attacks coming from China, from Ukraine, from Poland, from South America, from all over the place. People attacking hosts in the United States to try and get at their resources or to try to disrupt them. We saw a nation-state attack on the pipeline several months ago that shut the pipeline down completely. And you saw the crowds coming up at the gas pumps almost instantly. Even now, today, meat prices are rising because several months ago, they attacked the meat packing plants and shut down their systems. And so today you're seeing that reflected in rising meat prices. As a matter of fact, there are all kinds of attacks taking place all over the supply chain, between transportation, manufacturing, communications. All of those things are being disrupted. And every time any one of them is disrupted, everything that follows it is disrupted. And this is really perhaps one of the best expressions of the new age 2022 disaster. Let's call it disaster 20.22. It's supply chains. It bleeds over from the digital world into the real world, and it makes our lives miserable. This is not going away. We're very fortunate. I'm going to put the kibosh on it, but knock on wood, we haven't seen major disruptions of the electrical grid. And the fact is we're very, very vulnerable. It is altogether possible for nation-state actors or even domestic bad actors to attack the electrical grid. And that would mean taking everything down. Everything that we do would stop. So this is no small matter. This is where disasters are going to occur. Yes, we're going to have earthquakes. Yes, we're going to have floods, and tornadoes, and so forth. But we're also going to have massive blackouts. What do we do without electricity? A lot of things to think about there. Some of those things to think about, some of the hedges against that kind of disaster include renewable resources. Batteries connected to solar engines. Get the solar energy and store it, harder to disrupt. Wind energy, harder to disrupt. If they use the grid, yeah, they're still vulnerable. But we can come up with better strategies, and we need to. While we're talking about big networks, let's talk about the Internet of Things. Okay, obviously there have been more things on the Internet than there are people since 2008, according to Cisco. So we've been there for 13 years, and it's just gotten bigger. There are billions upon billions of sensors, controls, and whatnot all over the planet that are deployed and connected back to the Internet. So many so that we are now changing the way in which we deploy the Internet of Things. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to have a connection going back from each of 10,000 sensors in a given installation. Better to take those 10,000 sensors and connect them to a local concentrator, a server or a switch or a router, and then connect that one device back to the Internet. This is what we're referring to as the edge of the Internet, and there's a lot going on at the edge. First of all of our users are by nature at the edge of the Internet. They're out there as endpoints. But now all these little devices, they're all low-powered. They're all very signal lossy. They're not well protected. And so connecting them to a protected device that then connects back to the network is a very economical way to proceed. Unfortunately, it also creates a good single point of disaster. If people attack those concentrator devices, they can bring down meshes of thousands upon thousands of sensors and switches. So whole implementations can be just knocked out by knocking out one device. We're vulnerable. And so therefore, we've got to change the way in which we protect these things, change the way in which we secure these things, and really pay a lot more attention to the network edge than we ever have before. This is why things like secure access, I've completely forgotten what it stands for, Secure Edge. SASE was developed to protect at the edge. So explore how you're going to be deploying your edge computing. But as you're doing it, explore how you're going to protect it as well. Secure Access Service Edge. There we go. I'm sure you've all been sitting there wondering when I'm going to get around to this and waiting for me to address it. Here it is. It is by far the most frequent attack occurring in our environment. There are more ransomware attacks than any other kind of attack. And there's a very good reason. Because ransomware is designed to attack the most vulnerable component in your network, that part that exists between the keyboard and the chair, the user, the human being. Unlike digital devices, human beings are not consistent. They are not as dependable. They are given to vary in the way they respond to things. It's unsure. And so attackers create an email, a phishing email, if you will, and send it out. It looks real. It looks genuine. It looks like it's some organization you do business with every day. And it invites you to click a link to get a service. And when you click that link, you open the doors to hell. All of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, and your entire network is impacted. All kinds of invasions take place simply because you opened the door. You may have opened an attachment, clicked a link, but now the attackers are in. and getting them out is going to be a disaster. Of course, while they're there, they may encrypt large portions of your data. You don't have the key, so your data has just become useless to you. Here comes the bad actor, the cyber criminal, and they send you a ransom note. You need to pay these millions of dollars, and we'll unencrypt, we'll decrypt your data. Here we go. People have paid those fines. The highest ransom I've heard of is $40 million, which just is astounding. Some of the thieves have lowered their rates. They ask for less because they know more people will say yes. Very clever. Ransomware isn't going away. As long as people are using the network, there'll be ransomware. And training has been our only defense against it. It's not a perfect defense. But training and regular refreshers and regular updates are always very helpful. Now, we're starting to see the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to create behavioral analysis systems that look for people who are doing things they shouldn't ought to be doing, things they wouldn't ordinarily be doing, unusual events, anomalies. And when they detect them, they report them. This has significantly reduced the success of ransomware attacks, but we're really just at the very beginning of it. There's still a lot more development to be done. Certainly, if they give you any relief, put them in place. But anticipate that you're still going to have trained users, and they're still going to have to know, what to watch out for and how to avoid being victimized by phishing emails. Okay, so everything we've looked at so far have been attacks we're familiar with, things that have happened before, and we've looked at how they're going to increase in 2022 and beyond, because they are. They're increasing even now, and next year they'll increase even more. There are some newer ones that are just being introduced that will become more prevalent in 2022. Deepfake, great example. Deepfake software, deepfake technology makes it possible to manipulate video recordings and get people saying things that they would never, in your wildest imagination, say. You'd have Democrats campaigning for Republicans. You'd have police officers encouraging people to steal. Those are just small, simple examples. It can be much more severe than that. People giving away national secrets when they never really did that. It's a great way to spread more misinformation. Deepfake technology is frighteningly effective. Fools people completely. It can be detected, but that requires a process. We're going to see more and more implementations of it, more and more imagination, driving more and more insidious uses of deepfake. Just as we said that artificial intelligence was being used to create behavioral analytics to prevent ransomware, well, bad actors and cyber criminals have access to artificial intelligence as well. And they are starting to use it to make their intrusions ever more sophisticated than they've ever been. So now we're seeing we've got the same weapons. We're going to see more sophisticated attacks than we've ever seen before. And the nature of these. Each of these will cause disasters, not just inconveniences. They'll be bringing down whole systems, municipal systems, federal systems, as I said before, the power grid, telephone systems, internet systems that serve millions upon millions of people. And so the definition of disaster is truly being completely renovated by the way in which we're being attacked. Another new development that we need to think about that is the passing of the password. Yes, password is dead. Microsoft told us, so it's true. Microsoft has declared that they're doing away with passwords. And they'll be using the authenticator. They'll be using multi-factor authentication, all kinds of other technologies, but no more passwords. And this is good news. This is actually very good news, because the reality is that somewhere close to 80% of users still use the word password as their password. Or they use their spouse's name, or their pet's name, or their significant other's name, something recognizable, or patterns like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's clever. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Also clever. More than you believe, people are using that as their password because it's easy to remember. People are still writing their password on sticky notes and sticking them under their keyboards or to their monitor. You can walk into an office and you can log into somebody's computer because you will find somebody's password pretty quickly. Frightening, but really true. Once we do away with passwords, none of that will be possible anymore. We won't have to enforce strong passwords that nobody can remember. And we won't have to make it so that people have to write down their passwords, carry them with them. All of those things are bad. All of those things reduce our defense and invite more attacks. So the passing of the password is a good thing. It's something we should celebrate. So long, password. Glad to know you. Goodbye. This will take a while to roll out. Yes, Microsoft is doing it. But now all the other providers of everything have to start to follow suit. I believe they will. I believe everybody sees the value of getting passwords out of our life. And now that we're getting multi-factor authentication on our mobile devices rather than some fob, some key fob, or some little device, it's much more prevalent, much easier to get at. And everybody can do it because they can either text it to you or call you with it. And so we're going to see much more of that. So we salute the password and we say goodbye. But the greatest casualty, the greatest disaster, and it has happened and it is done, there is no going back, is the demise of privacy. An early member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I'm a big believer in digital privacy. And I believe that people should spend a lot more time protecting themselves against the kind of exploits we see out there. We're constantly hearing about retail organizations or banks or other financial institutions being attacked and people stealing millions upon millions of records, people's social security numbers, their credit card numbers, all manner of other information that can be used to steal people's identities, to steal people's money, and to make people's lives miserable. There is no such thing as privacy anymore. When you walk down the street, most of the stores you pass, other facilities you pass, are reading your phone to find out who you are. That's how they find you. You may have had the experience of walking into a retail store and looking at a particular product. You didn't look it up online. You didn't Google it. And yet you start getting ads for it. You start getting emails about it. How the heck did they know I was looking at it? I just stood there. Well, either they use near-field communication to read your phone, or they simply used other technologies to read your phone and to find out who you are and to steal your identity. And now you are a target for all of their marketing. That's an innocuous way of using it. But literally everything we do, everywhere we go, we're being tracked. And so I say that privacy is the greatest disaster, the greatest casualty of our digital era. And we need to think about what that means for the future. As I say, there's no going back. But perhaps we can create new best practices that will protect our information better going forward. With that, John, have we received any questions?
We have, Howard. Let's get started with those, but I want to remind all of our attendees that they can type their questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to jump on and get those in. Let's start with this first one here from Fred. What is the best solution that segments the data so ransomware doesn't touch the backed up data?
Air gap. Instant answer. No, seriously true. You're best served to observe the 3-2-1 rule, meaning you back up at least 3 copies of your data on at least 2 different media, and one of those recordings is taken off-site, which means it's no longer on the network. It's air-gapped from the network. And therefore, they can't get at it. Not as quick to restore, not as quick to recover. But if they do, and they are, you're right, Fred, they're definitely getting through to the backups now. If they have gotten through your primary, encrypted that, gotten to your backups, and encrypted that, then you need to have that off-site storage. First, you repair however they got in, then you restore the backup, and then you resume. But there can be no better way to segment off the data than to completely remove it from the network.
Awesome. Okay, here's one from McKenna. You didn't really talk about VDI. How does that figure into disaster recovery?
Yeah, when you first started reading Fred's question, I thought this was going to be the answer. Many people, especially with mobile devices, they want to segment the personal data from the corporate data. And that's what corporations want people to do now that they're working at home. They don't want the two to mix. They don't want somebody using text to send corporate data to a friend. They want them segmented from each other. Segmentation is in and of itself very difficult to do. However, VDI is a great solution. The virtual desktop interface or virtual desktop infrastructure, depending on who you learned it from. VDI means that nothing's happening at your end user's computer. Nothing. No data goes there. No processing happens there. It's all happening back in the data center. And so even the user themselves can't get at the data to bring it over to their private side. That's terrific. And it's a very effective way. It's a very effective way of segmenting corporate activity from personal activity. However, the price you pay is that VDI is complex. It's a very difficult thing to maintain, and especially when we don't have people in our data centers right now. You know, people couldn't get into the data center because of COVID. It would be a hard thing to do. What I predict, is that more companies are going to get full-time into the VDI business. Meaning to say that they'll do the VDI for you. They will deliver whole desktops to you. And you won't have to manage any of it. You won't ever get near the data. Your users won't really ever get near the data. You simply have to have a trust relationship with your provider, as you do with your cloud provider today. So desktop as a service will become a more prevalent cloud service. Future of VDI.
Okay, here's one from Alan. He writes, DDoS protection in cloud should be at the highest level of service by default to protect not only the integrity of the cloud provider, but also customers. My providers offer DDoS, quote, enhanced/advanced, end quote, or other verbiage as an additional cost. How can customers demand the highest level of service by default and not an add-on additional cost.
And that's what we call the free enterprise market. You're right, Alan. There are, just as there are in any other industry, there are providers who try to play the ups and extras game with you. They nickel and dime you. They charge you for things that, as you say, you really ought to get by default. You know, it should be a default that the service you use is protected against DDoS attacks and many other kinds of attacks. And some providers just don't do that. My prediction, I don't know of any, I'm honest, full transparency. Off the top of my head, I don't know of any who actively assure you of that. However, I've got to believe there are some. My suggestion is find one and shop there. Go where the competition does a better job. And soon, those who are not offering it, boy, they'll start offering it because they're losing business. That's a different kind of vote. We vote with our wallets, but that's the only way I know of to leverage a provider to do what they really ought to be doing in the first place. And that's not a kind of provider I want to do business with.
Okay, here's one from Aaron. It's kind of a long one. Do you have a strategy for addressing some of the new ransomware attacks where there is an extortion element where the bad actor is threatening to expose stolen data to ruin your reputation? Pardon me. Backing up data is great, but you can't restore reputation as easily. Well, ain't that
That's very, very true. Well, that's terribly true. The answer to your question is no. I don't have a strategy for that. My strongest recommendation is that you not store those things where they could be accessed by anybody ever under any conditions. I know, we see this happening with young people where they're experimenting with things and they're taking photographs of each other that they really shouldn't be taking, and they post them to their Dropbox or their OneDrive or whatever, and somehow somebody gets in and gets at them and broadcasts them all over the school. Horrible. Terrible thing to do to another human being. The only way to stop them, don't put it there. Honestly, that's what they have thumb drives for. I would personally, if you have anything that you really don't want anybody ever to see, the best place to store it is on a pair or a trio of thumb drives, only to make sure that you're doing the 3-2-1 rule and you're providing multiple backups. But I would not connect those to any network ever under any circumstances. Other than that, no, I can't off the top think of any way that you can recover a reputation once it's been blown. John?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there.
I thought I fell off the phone again.
I had a little coffee.
Okay.
Okay, this is another one from McKenna. She wonders, should we be backing up each other's computer or let each of them be responsible for that?
Each other's computer. I don't want to back up anybody else's computer. Maybe she ruined the right each user's computer.
That's each user's computer. That's right.
Okay. I think that the worst person to trust with backup is the user. Sorry, but I don't know all the users, and so I have to go to the lowest common denominator, and the worst of them doesn't back up. So no, I don't trust users to do their backups. I believe that if you're going to do a belt and suspenders backup system, you should back up everything. And you don't know what users are putting on their computers, and you want to have a record of that. So I think that should be automated. I'll also kind of raise my hand again and say that, as we move more and more of this to becoming delivered as a service. In that VDI example, there'll be nothing on the user's computer, and therefore we won't have to worry about backup.
Gotcha. Okay, here's one from Sam. He says, how do we know how far back is back enough? And methodologies for recovering the information in the gap. I think you talked a little bit about this earlier. Do you want to say some more? How far back is back enough?
And actually, you're remembering my last presentation where we talked about restore point objective and restore time objective. And this is something everybody has to calculate for themselves. How much data can you afford to have disappear? Meaning that you do a backup, and then you operate for a while, and then you have a down. When you have a down, anything that happened since the last backup is lost. So that's really your restore point objective. How far back are you willing to let that be? How much can you recover manually? And that varies from business to business. The difference between disaster recovery and business continuity can really be said in simply that the restore point objective is instantly. You can't have a restore point. It has to be backed up to the last minute. And it's difficult. It's expensive. But if that's what your business demands, it's a worthwhile investment. Restore time objective, the faster that our drives get, the faster the restore time objective can be. If you're doing it locally, that can be really fast. If you're doing it across connection, depends on the connection. The faster the connection, the faster you'll restore. Again, it's a balance between how much downtime you can tolerate and how much money you can afford.
Fascinating. Here's one from Luke. It may be my favorite question of the day. What's the best way to say "I told you so" to a client who refuses to spend on new backup solutions?
The best way to do that is to not to do it. I know the temptation. I've lived that temptation. I can't tell you how many times. I mentioned the customer who had their last backup was 6 months ago. And there was the time when you weren't sure that the backup would restore. It backed up, but will it restore? If you're willing to give up the relationship with that customer and any referral that customer may ever give you in the future, tell them I told you so. Beat your chest, go home and laugh. Personally, it's their business that's been impacted. And although it might be personally gratifying, it's pretty costly in terms of the relationships you lose. I like that question.
So we've got time for one more. Let's see. Could you explain the 3-2-1 rule a little more?
Yeah, actually, I realize now that I didn't explain it during the presentation. But the 3-2-1 rule simply says that best practice is to create at least 3 copies of your data at all times. Mm-hmm. Use at least 2 different media. If one's on disk, maybe the other's on tape. If one is local, maybe the other one's a cloud service. But 2 different media. And then the third thing is to have 1 copy of it that you take off premise. And here's the place where you can interpret that. Some people take off premise to mean on a cloud service. And that's off premise. It's not on premise. But going back to the question from earlier, if it's in that cloud service and you're connected through that cloud service, it is possible for a cyber criminal to cut through, get to that cloud service, and steal that data or encrypt that data. So it's not really off the network. It's off premise, but not off the network. So my recommendation is still use media. Use a disk medium, use tape medium, whatever you want, but something removable. and something that you can put in a vault or take home with you. Or just get it off the network. Whatever you do, get one copy off the network. So if all else fails, you've still got a copy.
Fascinating. Well, Howard, that's all the time for questions we have. Thank you very much for an awesome session.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. Love the questions. Really appreciate them.
All righty. Looks like that's all the questions we have time for. Many thanks to Howard M. Cohen for making for this great session, and to our sponsors, KOSoft, iLand, and Metallic for making it possible. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back at the top of the hour for our second session, the new best practices for backup and recovery with your modern cloud, hybrid, and HCI infrastructures. Led by Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricorn Elite Consulting, and moderated by my colleague, the driving editorial force behind virtualization and cloud review, David Rammel. Now would be a great time to check out those extra resources on your console provided by our sponsors. And remember, during today's third session, we'll be giving away a Surface Pro 8, Microsoft's latest 2-in-1 hybrid laptop, which you must be present to win. So stick with us. Back in a few.
Welcome back to our second session. David, please take it away.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to thank our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course, Chaosoft, Island, and Metallic for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Rattle, editor of Virtualization Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our summit called The New Best Practices for Backup and Recovery with Your Modern Cloud, Hybrid, and HCI Infrastructures. Our speaker for this session is Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with over 20 years of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. Dave, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David, and thanks for all the crew for having me back again. As you know, we've had a lot of discussions this year around backup and disaster recovery, and this is a good one because the focus of this is the operational side of backing up and recovery for your clouds and hybrid infrastructure. I'd also like to thank Howard and John on a great previous session. There's so much amazing information in there. You know, I always gain a lot of additional knowledge listening to those two when they speak. So thank you guys very much for a great previous session. So let's get going. So what do we need to think about for enterprise disaster recovery for, you know, the upcoming year and beyond into your kind of 5-year roadmap? Well, I think the first thing that's happened is in 2020, you know, we were hammered by COVID-19, and that rolled through all the way through this year, and it's still going on worldwide, and has really changed the game and changed the landscape for, you know, how we think of backup and disaster recovery. And some of the big pieces is, you know, traditional DR, as we would think about it, would be some type of a natural disaster, fire, flood, hurricane. I like to throw forest fires into the mix now because it seems like every other week there's, you know, a beautiful forest that's on fire because of, you know, global warming or a variety of other reasons. And, you know, those can directly impact our access to key and core systems that we have. But one of the big ones that's really changed the game over the last couple of years, and what we really need to think about, is how cybersecurity is impacting our DR decisions that we have. And so that's going to be a big focus of this presentation. We have to think about, you know, what is this going to look like, you know, if my data gets ransomed? How am I going to bring it back? How am I going to recover it? Where am I going to recover it to? Are my backups even viable? And so that's going to be a big portion of the presentation today, and that's one of the big key things that I want you to think about just as your kind of first gold nugget moving through this presentation. And now I want to introduce everyone to a backup and DR concept that I call the cascade effect. And the cascade effect for me came from me working with operational support teams around the globe, trying to help them strengthen their skill sets on backup and recovery. One of the big things that we look at as what we'll call a backup and disaster recovery analyst or engineer is, well, we have something on the network. We have some type of a service that's being provided to end users. I like to call them customers, even if we're working internally inside of that organization. And so with those consumers of that technology, we need to protect it. And then we've got to protect it in a variety of ways. And, you know, Howard was talking about in the previous session, the 3-2-1 rules. You know, I want 3 copies of my data on 2 different mediums. I want one of those to be off-site. Maybe I want one of them to be cloud. And so what that means for us as backup and DR engineers and analysts is we have to have multiple copies of that production server. It's not a 1-to-1 mapping. We could have a 2, 3, 4, 5x multiplier on that data stored in different mediums, because We want to protect it in a variety of places, and I want to be able to recover it in a variety of places. And so, in simple terms, the cascade effect is this. You have, we'll take a scenario of just a virtual machine that's running on the network, and the virtual machine running on the network is doing a great job, just an absolutely fantastic job. It's got a data drive attached to it, and it's currently 500 gigabytes inside. So a request comes in. We get an RFC coming in from the application support team, and they say, well, you know what? I'd actually like to increase that data drive and double the capacity of that data drive. I'd like to go to 1 terabyte. Well, what does that mean for the backup in DR team? Because typically what ends up happening is that request ends up getting processed through right away. It's a very simple request. Just expanding a drive. We've got space on our hyper-converged infrastructure. No problem. That's one of the reasons that we bought that gear in the first place. We love HCI because it's so easy to manage. So easy to manage creates some problems in the back end for the teams that are, providing backup in DR solutions and behind it. So that 500 gig request in the 5x multiplier means, 500 gigs for the production team, but now it's 2.5 terabytes potentially for the backup in DR team. And this is your cascade effect. And your cascade effect is in more than just storage. It could be in networking. It could be in a variety of other places. But we really see this coming true from the storage side of managing virtual infrastructure, where we think that it's such a simple operation that, it's just that 500 gigs. Well, it made a big difference because now we just put a lot of additional pressure on our back-end backup in DR infrastructure. And what I've seen happen from the operational teams is that we start to outrun the space available in our backup in DR environments very quickly because, you might be looking after one hyper-converged infrastructure cluster, but maybe our backup targets that are supporting that are looking after 3, 4, or 5 clusters backing up to one backup target. And now I've got all of those hyper-converged clusters taking and increasing on a daily basis. Well, it's a compound effect behind the scenes for the backup in DR team. So what I want you to walk away with from this session is I want you to think about that cascade effect and how it affects your business and operations. And heading into 2022, if you're going to continue along the same path and that same journey with the ease of use of hyper-converged infrastructure, just any infrastructure in your networks, you better be planning for additional backup and DR space. And this problem absolutely compounds itself once we move up to the cloud, because once we move up to the cloud, space is no longer as much of an issue anymore. So if you want your pocketbook to be hurt really quickly by having to continually consume more blob storage for where we're putting these things, this is where we're going to have problems. So this cascade effect is a term that I'm now using with my operational teams to help give them and have them gain insight as to the small requests causing massive impacts in behind for teams outside of their own. All right. The next one is single set DR isn't enough. So I call it single set DR because there's a variety of different scenarios from an operational perspective that we now look at. I've started to train our operational support teams that, even something as simple as patch management for our infrastructure. Well, if you have the space, you can look at a variety of different DR scenarios for replicating those VMs, because I've seen it far too often where we go through a patch cycle and we take an unplanned outage of business critical applications. This could be in a healthcare EMR space where, we're taking down something that's, supporting a surgical theater or something like that. And if this is the case, can that potentially be avoided at all? Because that's a 24/7 operation. I still need to patch it. Hot patching is not fully available unless you're fully up on the cloud right now. So I still have to take reboots of a lot of the infrastructure to do patching. And so one of the things that we started to do is that we have hot DR available for us in same rack. So for example, let's say we lost one of our hyper-converged clusters, because we're talking about hybrid infrastructure and cloud infrastructure. And let's say one of those clusters went down. Well, the time to recover that going either cross data center or cross facility could potentially take longer than being in same rack. So if it is a critical operation, I know I do a lot of work supporting manufacturing plants around the world, and we can't take those long sustained outages because we're line sequencing parts, and we have issues like that could come into play. So what we do is we have something called DRO1, which is in-rack DR. It's a hypervisor that's set up in place so that we can actually take and have very quick, seamless recovery in the event that something goes wrong, or in the event that we've got to do emergency maintenance to that HCI cluster, because it does happen. Infrastructure is infrastructure. And so at the end of the day, there's a variety of hardware failures that could hit us. And once we go past our N+ fault domains and we do have to take a full outage of that gear, we're talking about a multitude of virtual machines that could potentially be going offline. And so I like in-rack DR. It's just a very fast way of, before I do maintenance on a system, I've always got the concern that, well, is it really going to come back online? I'll take a hot DR replica swipe over to DRO1 so that I can almost near real-time fail that back without much data loss at all for the organization. And then DRO2 would be something that we would look at, probably same site, maybe in a different data center. Like I said, I deal with a lot of large manufacturing organizations, so we have plants, multiple plants the size of football fields. So we could be dealing with one in one plant, one in another plant, but it's still in the same general facility connected by high-speed fiber optics. So we can still fail over, but, we're going to be having a bit of lag inside of there because it depends on when those replicas took place. The third DR is going to be out to some remote data center. Maybe we've got a co-location facility, and that would be typically maybe I would take that path nightly. Yeah, I'm going to sustain some type of a data loss if I take and have to fail over to that, but at least if that entire facility went down, I'm talking single site recovery at this point in time. And then the last one is potentially DR to the cloud. Maybe you're going to replicate that infrastructure up to the cloud. And I know a lot of you are thinking right now that, listen, why are you having DR to the cloud as the fourth option? And the reality of it is I have to go across a constrained pipe to get to the cloud, and it's typically my slowest medium to get there, and it's typically my slowest medium to get back. So I'll try the other failover options first before I get there. And so you look at this with the compounded with the cascade effect. In scenarios like this, I might have 4 replica copies of my infrastructure. This doesn't even count backups. And so if this is the case, and I've got that critical of infrastructure, my cascade effect just for DR is an X4. Okay, so it's something to really keep in mind as we take a look at building and designing this, especially moving forward into 2022. And I'd be really curious for those listening on the call today, how many sets of DR everyone has. Like, do you basically go single site DR? Do you go 2 sites, 3 sites, no sites? I'm really curious as to what you have available for your DR today, because what you need, especially in today's cybersecurity world, is you really want dark copies of this in a certain place just in case your primary DR copies get compromised for a variety of reasons. All right. The next thing is, as we move through into 2022, is I find so many organizations went through the exercise of next finishing DR so that they could get their checkbox for their yearly audit saying, yes, we have DR. Absolutely. We are covered by DR. Well, setting up for DR and having your organization operationalized for DR are totally different things. And so some of the issues that I've seen in the past year, and we're going to continue in through 2022, is number one is the middle item here is that organizations forgetting that they have DR jobs and backup jobs running on their infrastructure. So all of a sudden they're going to go do some type of maintenance on critical servers or hyper-converged infrastructure. And all of a sudden, our backup and DR teams are getting flooded with alerts that all of their jobs are failing because the core services have just started to reboot. So please, once again, remember that cascade effect is more than just storage. You doing maintenance and not notifying the other teams is very problematic. And the DR teams just kind of sit there quietly because our job is to back up and protect that. So we don't always think that that's an active operational state, but it absolutely is. And so make sure that you're disabling those DR jobs when you're going to be doing maintenance, because you don't want to be triggering a whole bunch of alerts and or failing a bunch of those backup jobs. The next thing is prior to doing any maintenance of any sort, we've actually built it into our request for changes, our RFCs, that we take a DR replica pass or a backup pass of that infrastructure. I've seen too many cases where, because of COVID-19, we have a very difficult time going into data centers and or going into facilities and getting there quickly. And the other big issue is even getting parts if something breaks. So now we have the mindset with our operational teams that everything's got a potential of breaking at any point in time. And it could be weeks, if not months, to get spares if something goes wrong. So I need to make sure prior to any maintenance cycles that we do DR and replica passes and backup passes. Yes, I know from an operational perspective that this adds time to the mix, but in the event that you do kill some of that hardware during a maintenance cycle, at least you've got a point in time that's just minutes prior to you making the change inside of the outage window anyway. And so I'd highly recommend adding that in. I'm seeing constraints right now, even ordering new servers upwards of 90 to 120 days right now because of chip shortages and such. So I don't know if you guys listening to the call are seeing the same thing, but across many, many customers in my customer base, we're seeing this. And so I plan for failure everywhere now, just because I can't control that hardware. I can't control a DIMM dying in a memory slot. I can't control extra drives dying. I can't control a NIC dying or a PDU dying. I want to make sure that I've got something to fail over and fail back to effectively as we go through this. All right, so operationalize your DR, talk to your teams, and make sure that you're taking and running more passes of DR. It's a good idea. Do not be a data hoarder. What does this mean? This means that you have file servers that have lived on your network for probably the better part of 20 to 25 plus years. And I know from a compliancy standpoint, some of you are going to have to keep data forever. Yes, that is true. But where you keep the data is a totally different topic. And so one of the things I want you to highly consider moving into 2022 is where exactly you're going to be placing that data. Because just because I have to keep something for 100 years for compliance reasons does not mean that I need to take and have that on a all-flash NVMe HCI cluster that is extremely expensive on a cost per gigabyte perspective. Maybe I only need to keep 20% of that data there, the hot data there. So I really want you to consider some type of cloud tiering. I know that Azure Cloud gives us a lot of those capabilities for having cloud tier options where we can automatically scale up to the cloud. And please, if you're not bound by compliancy where you have to keep a bunch of that data, can you please in 2022 consider pressing the delete button for me? That would be most helpful, because in the same way that we have a cascade effect impacting my backup and DR infrastructure, we can also have a reverse cascade effect where I save space. So you go through an analysis project of these file servers that you have on the network that you're protecting from a backup and DR perspective, and now I actually get back all of those same amounts of space. So in the same way that we added a 500 gig drive, imagine taking away a 500 gig drive in that DR scenario. Now I just got a 4x multiplier in space savings for my DR infrastructure just by going and cleaning things up. Now, data hoarding is not limited to just file servers. You're going to have orphan virtual machines from VM Sprawl that are out there that are no longer being used. Number one, you need to go through and analyze those and at minimum turn them off if they're not being used. Because if they're not being used, they're probably not being maintained. And if you want to talk about low-hanging fruit for threat actors coming into your infrastructure and having an easy way in and having their way with your systems is just go ahead and leave old, lingering, unpatched servers that are out there that nobody knows about. So go through your virtual infrastructure with a fine-tooth comb, figure out exactly what you need, and press the delete button on those VMs that you no longer need anymore, and it will take and clean up a lot of those holes, as well as saving a ton of space in the infrastructure. And it's not only limited to files and VMs, it's also your SQL Server and database infrastructure. I recently had a situation where our application support teams were going through an app migration, and they were creating copies of 300 to 400 gig SQL databases on the server itself. So this was not data that needed to stay there. So I really want you to go through and analyze the data that's on each of these servers as well, because every megabyte that's on there needs to be protected, falls into the realm of the cascade effect for our backup and DR teams. And just saying that we're backing it up isn't enough, because the smaller footprint that you can have in there, it means the faster that we're going to be able to back it up. It means the faster I'm going to be able to restore it. And it means the more longevity I'm going to get out of my backup and DR gear that's protecting all of this infrastructure. All right, the next one is probably most 100% ransomware events that I've been part of recovery teams on this year. And by that, I mean the bad guys got in, and they not only ransomed your data, they got your backups, and they got your DR infrastructure as well. This is bad news, because if you're in that potential situation, then what's going to end up happening is you could be left in a scenario, if you don't have dark and immutable backup copies, that you could be having to pay the threat actors. And the rolling price on the Kaseya breach was approximately $55,000 per server, or $5 million for the organization. How do I know those exact costs? Because I was on one of the recovery teams, and we were in this exact scenario. I got called in from a friend of mine that was a service provider, and we had an organization that was exactly hit like this. Everything was taken out, including all the backup targets, everything. And we didn't have anything else to go back to. So yes, we ended up having to pay for the key. Now the good news is we were able to get a key that recovered the backup target, so then we could go to last night's backups and recover everything. But what a painful process that was. It was brutal. So if you want to avoid that, there's a really simple way of doing this. Is I want you to consider taking and having a dedicated fabric for your backup infrastructure, for your DR infrastructure, and potentially for your hypervisors. Now, this can all sit in one realm if you want. But what's involved with that is from an Active Directory perspective, create yourself a new Active Directory Forreston domain, secure it, make sure that you're running all the latest security baselines on there, make sure that you're enabling multi-factor authentication, lock that sucker down. Consider running network isolation via IPsec inside of there as well. And what will end up happening is that in the event that you do get hit by ransomware again, instead of all of your backup targets and all of your DR being taken out, you actually have the capability of restoring at that point in time instead of you having to pay. Now, this doesn't potentially solve the problem that there was a question that Howard got in the previous session about how does this protect against data exfiltration, and it really doesn't. The only thing that's going to really protect you against data exfiltration is you've got to move your protection stack out to the firewalls, and you've got to have your firewalls aware that that traffic is going outbound and potentially shut it down automatically, saying, this is a really weird request going out to an abnormal country. The firewall is going to make a decision to, immediately turn on some type of threat protection to block that traffic, because it's seeing it as some type of a ransom or data exfiltration. A lot of your servers won't be able to understand that that's going on by themselves out of box, okay? The next thing that's super important for you on your servers and your desktops is you need to make sure that you load up some type of advanced persistent threat protection. Microsoft has now rebranded their protection for cloud, and it's called Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Microsoft Defender for Cloud actually uses the same agents as Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, so it can do all of the endpoint detection response for you. It can take and it can handle all of the persistent threats. We can analyze these things, and we can try to shut down these attacks in flight. So you really need to consider that as well. All right. And the last piece is, I want you to go through not just your backup targets. I want you to also very seriously consider what servers on your network actually require internet access. And if they are using some type of cloud-based service for protection, we can open up specifically just those ports and protocols to have those systems talk to their cloud providers and nothing more. Because I can tell you for a fact that a backup target itself does not need to talk to the internet unless it's synchronizing somewhere up with the cloud. And if that's the case, then only open up those URLs and those ports and protocols that are required for that traffic and that traffic only. That is a big piece that will take and will stop a lot of that traffic dead in its tracks. And especially if you're going to be building a dedicated fabric to protect things, there's really no big reason to open that up. And you're thinking, well, what about patching and everything else? Well, you can proxy patch all of that stuff. You can WSUS it. You can set up patching tools. You don't need to wide open those things up to the internet. All right, so the backup infrastructure, as I was mentioning in the previous slide, is you need multi-factor authentication. So the rule of thumb is today, if you RDP to it, you multi-factor it. So if you are going to be RDPing to a server, just understand that the RDP protocol is one of the ones that threat actors really love, especially in weak and insecure environments that don't have password lockout policies and or that have exposed RDP endpoints out somewhere on the internet. And it's not just even on the internet anymore. I just want you to give me a virtual show of hands, everyone. How many of you through COVID-19 got the phone call from the big bosses that said, whoa, we need to send everybody home here because they can't work in the office. We need a VPN solution set up right now. And so we went back to the big bosses and said, well, yeah, but, that's going to be a little insecure just opening up everyone's home network. It doesn't matter. They need to work. Open it up. Okay. So now I consider exposed endpoints from the homes as basically wide open internet endpoints because I can't control the traffic that's going into somebody's house, and I can't control what their kids are doing on that home network or the grandparents or, what's going on inside of there. And now I'm supposed to have this laptop that I take home from work that I connect to the same Wi-Fi that's got no isolation on it, that's got a direct connection back to work, and can be easily attacked from other devices on that home network. So now I actually consider those open-ended RDP connections where they used to say internet. I actually consider that coming across the home VPNs that we've set up. And at minimum, when you set up those VPNs, don't just set them up as wide open VPNs. Do some type of ports and lockdowns on them, please, okay? This is also why advanced threat protection comes in so important. You load up full load APP on absolutely everything. I do have some really good news for everyone in regards to the Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection Plus for our smaller to medium-sized viewers on today. At Microsoft Ignite this week, Microsoft announced that the advanced threat protection feature sets are now available with the business premium SKU for Office 365. You no longer have to be on like a full E5 or a separate E5 type SKU to get these. They're not even really all that watered down. You still get advanced threat protection, endpoint detection and response. You still get look at that. You may already even be licensed for it. And if you're not using it, you need to, all right? Advanced Threat Protection in the cloud, as I mentioned, is now rebranded Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So this actually just happened last week, so my slide's not even updated yet. vulnerability scans for your backup infrastructure and just infrastructure in general is a really huge one for me as well, because when we next finish something on an install, and so once again, just a show of hands, have you ever downloaded an ISO from Microsoft, for example? Let's say it's a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 ISO, and you get the install screen on your brand new device, and it's like next, finish, and poof, we've got Windows. Well, fantastic. Congratulations. You've now successfully installed Windows, and you can get on the internet in a completely insecure manner. So there's a ton of vulnerabilities that need to be locked down on those systems. You can lock them down in a variety of sources. You can lock them down via Endpoint Manager. They have some security baselines that you can place on those machines. If you want to look at the free ones from Microsoft, you can grab actually the latest Server 2022 and Windows 11 ones come with the Security Compliance Toolkit version 1.0. That's a free download from Microsoft. If you want a paid version of that with some really good documentation that comes with it, you can look at the Center for Internet Security, or CIS benchmarks. I highly recommend those as well. And so these benchmarks are put in place to stop the next finish holes that are left inside of our infrastructure. And in a lot of cases, when we load up backup targets, we think that, oh, well, it's just a backup target. It doesn't need to be as secure as a production server. Let me reaffirm something, that your backup and DR infrastructure in today's cybersecurity landscape is just as important as production. DR is just as much production as production, because in the event that production goes down and that's your last line of defense, you want to make darn sure that that works. So make the investments and make sure that you're setting that up accordingly. We've had to hit the big red button to fail over to DR far more times than what I would have wanted in 2021. And I don't see that changing in 2022. It's just probably even going to get worse. And so this leads into the next concept here is immutable storage for cloud and on-prem. And immutable basically means that I want to have something that's going to be like a hack-proof type storage that we can place this on. Certain cloud providers provide this for you. And if you can't get an immutable storage appliance, you can always put something on external media. Maybe you get yourself a NAS array or something like that. Put it on an offline network. Put it on a dark network. Shut down the network port. Can't hack it if it's not online. And you might be very thankful for that being available. You're thinking to yourself, are we going back to the old days of tape here, where every Friday we ship the tape off to an Iron Mountain type facility, and that's what we would recover from? The reality is, yes, because in the event that everything's gone, you're going to be awfully thankful that you had a dark copy of that media available, even if it was a week old. Because when the business is presented with the scenario of you're going to lose a week's worth of data versus you're going to lose everything forever, they'll take a week's worth of data. Trust me, especially if we're looking at a massive recovery effort, because the moment that you get ransom or something inside of your network, you're not talking days of downtime. You're talking weeks, if not months, of recovery efforts to try to get all of that stuff back. So having that immutable and cold and cloud storage options are just so important for us as we take and we move forward. All right. Next one here. Next one is you want to also make sure that you're protecting Office 365 as well. Center for Internet Security, as of a few weeks ago, has some published benchmarks available for your Azure and Office 365 tenants, and I highly, highly recommend that you take and you look at going through these. It's basically a full-on vulnerability assessment for your tenants in your clouds that are up there. You want to make sure that those pieces are secure, because pretty much every organization that's out there is going to be taking and is going to be using some of those components. And once again, you go to spin up a tenant, an Office 365 tenant or an Azure tenant, it's pretty much the same deal as that next finish. And so you need to make sure that you're securing and locking that down. If you want to see some of the templates that Microsoft is providing, inside of your Microsoft Azure portal, there's a section in there called Azure Blueprints. Azure Blueprints are security and compliancy blueprints for your tenant that will help lock all of that down. I'm not saying that that might be the best fit for you, but at least you can take a look at all the recommended settings in there. And in the event that you are spinning up a brand new tenant or you haven't gotten there yet, you may want to consider starting with a tenant that's already had a lockdown blueprint kind of applied to it so that you're starting secure instead of trying to chase your tail and getting there. All right. Now we've had a few questions coming in from the audience here, and there's a really good one here from Arma Preet, and the question was, isn't IPsec old and outdated? Well, what a fantastic question. And the answer to that is that no, we still see it in use a lot. The network isolation recommendations actually that are in place, it's changed a little bit. So if we look at the way that this used to be implemented in early days of Windows 2000, we would create specific group policies for IPsec, and we could say that, oh, this domain controller can only talk to other domain controllers, and we could do a little bit of software-based network isolation. And inside of the modern way of doing this, this has actually been pushed over to the Windows firewall. So now we actually build these isolation rules via the Windows firewall. And where we extensively use these Preet is when we create privileged access workstations for accessing our infrastructure. And under the covers, even although it's called network isolation, it's really just IPsec policies that we're building under the covers inside of there. All right. The next question that I've got is from Aaron, and a great question indeed, is have you worked with Azure Site Recovery? The backup is constantly running to replicate to Azure, and if the on-prem drops, Azure VM goes live. We've had varied success with this. I think it depends on your policy. I've actually set this up for quite a few organizations, and by default, that shouldn't be a default nature where it's going to seamlessly fail over like that. There's a big red button inside of the Azure portal that you actually have to push to say either failover or have a planned failover like most other DR tools. So I'm thinking you probably have some type of a policy configured in place for that. Be very careful with Azure Site Recovery, though, if you're looking at protecting against ransomware, because if you are trying to protect against ransomware, you might not be able to get enough point-in-time copies going back to fully protect yourself with this. So you need a combination of like Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery to fully protect from ransomware attacks. All right, the next one that we've got here, and we've got a few more to go through, and then we'll get to a few more questions here. So the next one is in line with everything that I've been talking about, DR Playbook. Traditionally, we have one DR playbook. That single DR playbook is going to be something that's going to be set up for your traditional fire, flood, or fire, as I mentioned. My big piece is that you need to make sure that you have a second DR playbook now. The second DR playbook is going to be for cyber events, and it's a totally different realm of recovery with that. And make sure that before, if you are in a cyber event, you're not just going to go hit the big red button to fail over your DR instances, because if you've got an infection on your network, now you've just taken and you've infected all of your replica infrastructure as well, potentially limiting your options of recovery. All right, next one here, your cyber insurance policies. This one here is an interesting one for me, because with the huge hit that providers took with the Kaseya breach, I'm not even so sure how much longer this is going to be around for, and this is only my personal opinion. I have had lots of customers that have had cyber insurance. Cyber insurance has done a good job paying out on things. One of the things that we're finding is they're starting to put a lot more riders on your cyber insurance to qualify. Number one is you have to have attestation requirements, you have to sign forms, you have to have MFA, multi-factor requirements, you have to have hardening requirements now, making sure that things are actually locked down. And the biggest one for today's session, because I have had customers be in the situation where they have had to pay out, you need to set up a cyber defense slush fund. And what do I mean by a cyber insurance slush fund? Well, if you've got $1 million in coverage inside of your policy, that is not a prepay from the cyber insurance vendors. That's a you pay, get reimbursed. So in the event that you're ransomed or cryptoed and everything's locked out and you're desperate to get everything back, hopefully you had a secondary subline bank account that had a whole ton of cash sitting in it, because you're going to have to go dig into that. Because I don't know of a heck of a lot of banks that are going to be going and lending money for, cyber payments going out to try to restore your data. So you want to think about in 2022 starting to build up a reserve fund for the time that you are going to be hit, because the amount of cyber insurance that's going to be around to even cover this anymore, who knows if that's going to be around for a great deal longer, because you keep taking hits like this. There'll be so many riders that, you might want to just consider self-insuring as well. Like I said, so far, experience with cyber insurance vendors has been pretty good, especially from a recovery perspective, but just know and understand that they're tightening up how you can actually get these policies. All right, a little bit of training for everybody. I got some good news for you. For the first time in probably 5 to 6 years, Microsoft has actually come out with some new hybrid exams for you to go get yourself trained up. You're thinking to yourself, man, oh man, there is a lot that goes on between the cloud and on-prem. Maybe you're just an on-prem infrastructure engineer that's worked there for a long time, and you're looking to skill up and get ready for the cloud. And, this will also help out with your DR and recovery exercises. These exams actually cover hyper-converged infrastructure from Microsoft, clouds, configurations, all hybrid scenarios. It's actually the first Windows Server exams that have come out in a long time. They're actually moving into beta in December, so those will drop in December. And I like this one because we're actually making this a requirement for anyone to work on my team. Actually have to go through these 2 certifications, but they are very good. And there's also another one that Microsoft has that I didn't list on a slide here. They actually have a specific certification around it's called a cybersecurity analyst, or security operation analyst, I think is what it's called, the certification path. And I highly recommend that one as well, because that will deal with all your Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection pieces for you. All right. The next one is, it kind of leans back to that cascade effect that I was talking about earlier, but DR and recovery are a tricky one, because typically we're the catch-all bucket on our teams that says, well, you have an SLA. You have to meet the SLA. You have RTO and RPO. You have to meet those. And it doesn't matter what we add to the infrastructure, you need to protect it. Okay, what type of a budget are you giving me for backup gear? None. You're just going to squeeze all of this into everything that you've got. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, but we'll try to figure that out. So one of the things for 2022 I would really highly recommend for you is to try to go through an infrastructure and application rationalization. And here's just a recent scenario that I went through with a customer. We were actually able to remove 60% of the organization's SQL servers by consolidating to a SQL Enterprise version and having better instances and management over the clusters. We had had a team that had deployed way too many. We thought that it was the right way to do it to have a SQL instance for every app server. Not a good idea. Pushed our licensing into a bloat of over $200,000 in the hole. We dialed back all of that, and we reduced not only the savings in SQL Server licensing, but we also had that reverse cascade effect where we took and we saved a whole bunch of DR and backup requirements on the back end. So there's so much savings by not only from a licensing perspective, but you can really consolidate some of these pieces and, maybe even look at pushing some of that stuff up to the cloud as well. All right. Critical workstations. What a great topic. How many of you in the audience listening today support engineers, CAD/CAM, drafting engineers? I was actually just on a support call with one today. and had a look at the close to 50 plus applications that are installed on this workstation, high-end workstation, and to go ahead and have to reinstall all of that from ISO and media if you don't have a scripted process can take days to bring those things back online. And so the new norm for me is even if I've got localized copies on encrypted USB drives attached to those devices, I need to be able to bare metal them, because it's not just in the event that something happens from a hardware perspective. It's not just in the event that something happens from a cyber perspective. Maybe they get malware and we need to recover it. But maybe they actually need to flip over to a new piece of hardware, because those engineering stations are typically pretty high-end and they'll rotate through a lot faster than the regular desktop fleet. Well, if I can take a backup of one system and just restore it onto a new one and update all of the drivers, I probably just saved myself 2 days worth of work. So that is a really big one as well. So also consider protecting your critical desktops in your fleet as well. We've got two more, and we'll take some questions via David here. How about the cloud? What about your assets that are living inside of the cloud right now? You know, you bought in and you're moving to some of your hybrid infrastructure. You've got a site VPN or express routes or some type of dedicated connectivity. And, you know, now what are you going to do with from a cloud perspective? Do you need to protect those as well? And the answer is absolutely you do. And so was a really cool announcement at Microsoft Ignite a week ago is to protect organizations from forgetting about things like their cloud assets. Microsoft has actually introduced a brand new feature called Azure Auto Manage. And with Azure Auto Manage, you can set up policies across your cloud-based infrastructure to do things like setting up backup, to do things like setting up DR. Those are just a couple of the policies that are in there, and because the show's focused on that, that's where we'll have our focal point. But it also could be like your security settings and, you know, making sure that, you know, we didn't forget to do something, because there's a lot of moving parts when we move those things up to the cloud. And so Azure Auto Manage, managing everything from patching to backups to everything, and it can handle all of those pieces for you. And if you're doing it manually, fine, fair enough. Just remember, don't forget to test up in the cloud, right? So in the same way that we test in production, I need to make sure that I'm testing failover and failback capabilities. So build that into your DR plans as well to make sure that your cloud assets and artifacts are also tested as well. All right, this is the last one. This is a little bit of a tricky topic to finish up with. Plan for turnover and change. Well, this is something that I very quickly realized, even on our own teams, is the fact that the skill sets that are gained from being able to recover organizations from whole-level ransomware attacks are actually very, very sought after. And so your DR teammates that you have out there are becoming such a critical path to every organization that you need to plan for a loss of those critical DR skills, because maybe you have gone through all of these slides that I listed prior and you have operationalized DR and you feel like you're in really good shape. Well, those individuals that are running the backup and DR teams are highly, highly sought after in today's marketplace. As a executive or business leader listening in, one of the things you have to consider as a fallback plan is maybe some disaster recovery as a service via service provider to gap fill those requirements. Because if that critical resource that you have leaves and you're left in an unprotected state for a period of time, this is going to put your organization at a lot of risk. And you cannot just leave this stuff alone, because pretty much every DR environment that I've seen requires some type of constant care and feeding. So, you know, number one, make sure you really look after those resources if you are the upper management, because just understand that they're getting hit up by recruiters pretty hard. And so just understand that that's going to be a required skill set moving forward. All right, and with that, I will hand it back to David. And David, we can have time for probably a couple questions here before we wrap up.
We certainly do, Dave. Thank you for that presentation. So let's get right to the questions. Let's go on a first come, first served basis. And the first one comes from Alan. If you want to follow along, it's a long question in the Q&A box, Dave. I'll read it while you catch up on it. And Alan says, in Azure, we have several geographic regions. We are looking at testing Azure backups using a backup vendor that has a MS tenant internal to Microsoft. On-premises backup / replication / DR storage will be encrypted and deduped by default. What hot DR replica would offer the fastest restore, most reliable, and most secure method to get customers back online, no matter what the reason is, to recover data? Azure storage is around 5 terabytes, and on-premises is over 30 terabytes for retention data.
Well, really good question, Alan. And unfortunately, I can't speak to your third-party vendor because there's a lot of moving parts that would go into seeing, which vendor it is that you're working with. But it sounds like you've got a really great one that you're working with. One of the interesting pieces of cloud and multi-geo cloud failovers that I've found in working with customers is the constraints of network bandwidth and pipes seem to really go away when we talk about, the fastest way of recovering that infrastructure. Because sometimes on-prem, we have issues with even struggling to get a 1 gig pipe. And I go back a long time, even just thinking of a 1 gig pipe is huge still. But we're talking some organizations I work with are looking at 100 gig pipes to the internet now. So long are those days gone by. But most organizations really struggle with having good pipes up and down from the cloud. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I put them at number 4 in the earlier slide. And so when you go cloud to cloud or multi-cloud to cloud, the recovery capabilities are a lot faster inside of there. And what you really need to do is just test and model those scenarios to see how fast that pipe is going to be able to move your data inbound in an ingress fashion and outbound in an egress fashion to see how long it's going to take to move either between your third-party tenant or if it is your tenant that you're moving across. You just need to test. You need to test to see how fast that's going to move across. So the good news is it's going to move a lot faster than probably you're used to, but still needs to be tested. So, yeah, my answer is test, David.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Dan. He says, why not set up remote access to their work PC with two-factor where they only have to access their work PC from their home? Why do a VPN to an insecure network? Nope, we didn't go that route. Remotely installed home PC to our security tools and allowed remote access to PC only. Is there any hidden risk this way?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, and I'm just double-checking in here, it looked like you did enable MFA. If you didn't, if you're RDPing to it, regardless of how you're RDPing to it, MFA it. So I had the exact same situation with one of our customers, and that's what they did. So they only opened up 3389. They could change the port if they want to, but we'll just say well-known port 3389 for RDP was opened up, and that was the only thing that was allowed over the VPN. And you had to MFA into it as well, just because it was coming from an insecure network as well. So, yeah, I would still MFA that. Your idea of only allowing what's required through there is absolutely the right way of thinking about that. And from a hidden risk perspective, just make sure that even with MFA enabled on those desktops, that you want to take and limit the amount of concurrent logons before it'll take and lock out those accounts. With having MFA, you can't really go through and use the same brute forcing tools. That's why we like MFA with RDP, because it kind of eliminates that brute forcing. So you're in a much more secure way, and Microsoft actually recommends this as well. When you're connecting to Azure-based resources, not just these wide open RDP connections, through Microsoft Defender for Cloud, this is actually now called just-in-time access, or JIT. And what will end up happening is with Microsoft Defender for Cloud and your Azure resources, you enable JIT on one of your VMs, so just-in-time access, and it not only opens the port for you, it'll restrict it down to an IP address and only leave it open for a period of time. So that's another thing you consider, especially if you're looking at cloud-based resources for this as well in the future. So, yeah, it sounds like you're doing a good job, Dan.
Okay, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So thanks again, Dave, for a great presentation and answering those questions.
Yeah, you betcha. My pleasure to be here, and wish you great luck with the rest of the show.
Okay, everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our third session, hottest third-party products, and the giveaway of our Surface Pro 8. You must be present to win. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to our third session. Becky, please take it away.
Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. If your first time, welcome. If you're coming back and you've been to one of these summits before, welcome back. We're so happy to have you with us today. Really quick housekeeping notes before we get started with these great presentations you're about to see. Number one, you will get a replay. It's probably coming about 24 to 72 hours after this. You will get that via email. Second, please be sure to stay on till the end. Not only is that how you get entered to win the Surface Pro 8, you don't have to do anything. You just have to be on. We do a random number generated based on everybody that's on the call. So just be on the line and you're definitely entered to win. But also because at the end of the call, we're going to do a survey and ask you what you think. We really love doing these summits. We want to make sure that they're what you want, what you need. So our readers take these surveys really seriously. We look at what you think, and we make sure that we do future events based on what your feedback is. So please stay on to the end, take that survey, let us know so we can keep doing great events for you. And talking about future events, and I always say this, but it's so true, we cannot do these events without our sponsors. We really want to thank Chaosoft, Island, and Metallic. Basically, they underwrite the content. They allow us to bring you these events for free. We cannot do it without them. So by doing this, they're supporting the community and letting us bring you these free events that are extremely educational. So thank you so much to Chaosoft, Island, and Metallic. Please show your thanks. Download those resources that we have in the console. Go to their website, sign up for a demo, download a free trial. Say thanks, because it really, really helps us. It's the only way we can do it, and we want to keep doing these for you. So please say thanks, and thank you again, Chaosoft, Island, and Metallic, for supporting the community and letting us do these events. And speaking of that, I am so thrilled to have back with us one of our favorite speakers, Bob Boble. He's the founder and CEO of Chaosoft, and he's with us today to do a live presentation and Q&A. So, Bob, please take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be back doing this again. Last one was a very good success, I think, for everybody involved, and I'm pretty excited about this one as well. At another conference about a week and a half ago, we announced our entry into this space, so it was very timely that this session was coming up. Today, I want to talk a little bit about resilience, especially around your Microsoft technology and the identities that everyone uses to access the resources that you're paying all that money to Microsoft to get. And so we're really looking at Active Directory on-premise and Active Directory in the cloud, called Azure Active Directory, and how to make those services resilient in the face of an increasing threat profile against those. So I'm Bob Boble. I founded a company called Chaosoft a number of years ago. We're designing and building the latest hybrid management, monitoring, and recovery tools for your Microsoft technology and beyond. And I think the whole point of this slide is to let everybody know that I'm a little older maybe than some of you. I've been doing this for a while, and some things never change, and some things definitely change. Now that people have opened up their on-premise more to cloud, there's a lot more to worry about, and I think we're seeing that across the industry with the amount of effort being put into security. There we go. Well, we got a little screw up on our slides here. This is effectively just a short list over the last 6 or so months of attacks that have happened, and I'm going to describe these attacks in detail. They're typically targeting your on-premise Active Directory. There's often a misconfiguration that allows people to come into your environment and distribute malware in the form of either a wiper attack or an attack that would allow them to take your Active Directory servers out, your domain controllers out, by encrypting them. And we see this constantly happening. And the reason that Active Directory is such a good target is because that's where all the permissions lie to access everything. For most organizations, that's the most relevant identity and access platform that they have, and it still remains that way today. So the big question with all those attacks going on And, we've seen these now for a number of years. If you remember, I don't know, back in, I think it was 2024, 2023, Target, the retail chain, they had their Active Directory compromised, and that eventually led to their cash machines or their cash registers being compromised. So everybody who went through and bought something at Christmas time potentially had their credit cards hijacked. And so the big question with Azure Active Directory in the cloud and with Active Directory having so much focus on it from an attack standpoint, is Active Directory still relevant? That's a great question. And we really want to understand that because it really helps try to figure out where you put resources. So as we started to look at what people were planning and what people were actually doing, we hired a company to do some research for us, and they found that 79% of the organizations that they contacted were in hybrid, and the vast majority of those 79% were going to remain hybrid indefinitely, meaning that Active Directory on-premise was going to be synchronized up to the cloud, and they were going to have user accounts that were on-premise, moved up to the cloud, and being used simultaneously in both environments. And the number one reason for that was because they had legacy applications that they couldn't get into the cloud. They were had a lot of overhead and baggage, I call it, things that prevented them from moving to the cloud. 25% of those folks were, those survey respondents were actually looking at moving to cloud only when the next, between the next 12 months out to about 5 years. We've had customers continuously telling us that they want to do that, and it's been 3, 4, 5 years, with a 1-year goal that they had initially given, and they still haven't moved. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So the net here is that Active Directory on-premise still remains authoritative for hybrid identity management. Both directories have to be considered as critical pieces of infrastructure. And something like 50% of the disaster recovery plans didn't include Active Directory. So there's quite a few sort of holes in the way people are looking at Active Directory. Azure Active Directory has to be part of that recovery process. You can't, if you're in a hybrid environment, you can't just consider your on-premise directory. And I think the key thing to understand is that after an attack, if Active Directory stops working, your business stops, because that's the place that the vast majority of employees authenticate their credentials. And there is some help with Azure Active Directory showing up on the scene. But again, if authoritative identity is delivered by Active Directory on-premise, that's going to take some work to get you over. So what's actually happening here is that since hybrid Active Directory is the standard, we recommend, and most of our customers now are looking at a recovery requirement for Active Directory on-premise and Active Directory in cloud, which is Azure. And they're looking at the scenario of when they're going to get hit with either a ransomware attack or a wiper attack, or they're going to have some other type of corruption. Not if it happens. They're looking at planning for when it happens. So they're getting prepared for that eventuality. Now, that's when the entire directory comes out. But keep in mind that there are other changes that can have localized outages for Active Directory as well. User accounts get deleted. Group memberships get changed, and access becomes denied. And now we're seeing quite a few people losing their Office 365 licenses. But again, that's not the entire directory. That's just a small subset. So whatever you do to plan for recovery, plan for both types of outages. One is where the whole directory is gone and you need to recover your forest. And the other is when you have localized outages because the data has been changed inappropriately. You probably want to put controls around there. But these are big targets, and Active Directory is a pretty porous product in terms of places where attackers can go and look and find things that will let them compromise the environment. So now let's talk a little bit about why you would want to consider using Active Directory as the front line or the first response in a cyber attack. Well, you want to get people back to work. And typically in the on-premise world, and now even in the cloud world, the directory controls access to everything. So it makes sense that that become the first response, getting Active Directory back up and going so people can log in. But you want to make sure that when you try to recover Active Directory, you don't reinfect everything, right? Because if you just have server backups and you try to restore those, you're likely going to bring the malware or the infected software as part of the operating system back in, and you'll have the same problem you had. So you need to be very careful with the way the recovery comes. And we typically see this being called a full forest recovery. And again, typically Active Directory is the first in a series of things you want to do to recover from these, not just one and done. You can't just recover Active Directory and expect everything else to work. You know, your SQL servers or Oracle servers may be encrypted, or other things might have been spread out in the data. You might have to go correct that as well. But AD full forest recovery is a difficult process. It's not simple. If you have a situation where you're totally unprepared, again, something like half the organizations may have a DR plan, but it's never been tested, you're probably going to have a really hard time recovering, and you're going to suffer the consequences. It's very time-consuming. It's costly in terms of the complexity and the time it takes without assistance, and you definitely have to pre-plan so that you have everything in place to do that recovery. On the right-hand side of this slide, we have 80 forest recovery steps. This represents the top-level set of steps that you would have to do manually in each domain within your forest. So if you had 5 domains or 3 domains, you'd have to repeat that process several times to bring back your domain controllers. And this is a process that's designed not to reinfect everything. Each one of those individual each one of those individual areas, 1 through 21 there, actually may have 10 to 15 sub-steps that you have to complete as well. So what does Microsoft do to help this? Well, they have a recovery guide. They have something like 24 pages explaining how you can do recovery of Active Directory. Unfortunately, because it's so complex, they don't give you any kind of automation behind it. It can take days or weeks to actually do one, and because of that, it rarely gets tested. A lot of people were relying on this. They have the document there. They think, oh, we'll just follow the document, only to find out that their bare metal backups, those server backups, have been affected, and they're done, right? There's no good way to do the recovery. But there's some evidence that this doesn't work as well, and sort of shows you when somebody isn't totally prepared, what exactly can be sort of, I wouldn't say this is the worst case scenario because these folks actually recovered, but it's not certainly the best case if you had a little forethought and pre-planning and testing. Largest shipping company in the world, Maersk, they were very open about their directory being knocked out. They had 55,000 user devices wiped out in about 7 minutes. They were lucky. They had one of their almost 150 Active Directory domain controllers still available to them. They had one that was offline, actually. They had 1,200 critical applications that were offline, all of which had access going through Active Directory. So Active Directory had to be brought back before they could provide access back to those. And it doesn't, I feel bad. It's a little funny that the CIO had to sleep at the office for 70 days, but that was the reality. It took them 9 full days to recover just Active Directory. And again, they were very lucky. They did get it recovered. In their financial statements at the end of the year, talking about profit and loss, there was $350 million in the loss column just because of basically because of those 9 days. So the results of this, I think the takeaway from this is that time is money. And if you can't give access to, for example, Office, or you can't get access back to applications people are using because the identities aren't there, then you really need to think about identity resilience, bringing those things back as quickly as possible to get people back to work. So some advice from those good folks. The fellow, Andy Powell, who was the CISO, had a really good quote in this postmortem they did. 9 days for an Active Directory recovery isn't good enough. You should aspire to 24 hours. If you can't repair it in 24 hours, you can't repair anything else. Nothing else really matters. So Chaosoft has invented something called Immediate Forest Recovery. This is the product we just launched a couple of weeks ago. based on our experience in the recovery space and the management space, that we've accumulated over the past 20-some years. And the idea behind immediate recovery is that it allows you to recover in an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, not in days, and certainly not in weeks like Maersk had. It's a completely automated recovery process. We make sure it's a clean recovery so you don't reinfect the new recovery environment. In other words, we don't use bare metal backups. We actually retrieve on a daily basis or whenever you schedule it the components of Active Directory that need to be restored. That also makes an ideal backup because we're not grabbing the whole operating system, right, with its 30 gigs or whatever, and we're not grabbing just a snapshot of the changes each day. We're actually going in and making sure we get just the items we need to recover across your domain controllers. We automatically set up an isolated recovery environment, and it's separated from production. And because all this is automated, you can eliminate the worries about having a mirror Active Directory environment that's going to corrupt your production environment, which means testing can happen. So you can continue very easily with disaster recovery testing. A couple of other quick things about this really cool product that we have. It's called Chaosoft Guardian Forest Recovery. It provides, first and foremost, continuous change monitoring / change auditing with alerting. So not only does it look for changes that might cause or might be an indication that somebody's trying to take your forest out, it also looks for those little changes, right? Some group membership got cleared. Maybe that's the group that controls office licensing, and you want to know anytime more than 10 people are pulled out of it. We also monitor the security descriptors in Active Directory, looking for nefarious things going on there. And we look at Azure policies, conditional access policies, web access policies, global admins changes, domain admin changes, and if you find those, we alert you in Teams or by email. We provide that automated full forest recovery. How cool is that? And we call it immediate recovery because it's effectively going to take you a little bit of time, ahead of time to plan it, but when you need it, it's going to already be ready, and you just then have to basically switch over to that recovery forest. We'd also do immediate object and attribute recovery. So those lesser outages where somebody's license gets stripped or a group of people are no longer able to log in or work because their accounts have been disabled or deleted, we do all that in the same product. We have that clean restore capability so you don't reinfect. And then finally, all of our recovery environment construction is automated and it's isolated so that you can continue to test, which is a big thing, right? That thing has to work. You can't just have a plan and not regularly test it. Effectively, you could retest our plan daily if you wanted to. That's probably a little extreme. You probably don't need it that often, but it's definitely possible. Some other customers who trust us, we've spent a lot of time working with enterprises. We're pretty evenly split between government and commercial. We do have quite a few educational groups that work with us. I think they like our equitable licensing policies and our costs are very reasonable. Chaosoft is a full management solution, not just recovery. We also provide a 3-tier proxy architecture built into our management tools, which gives you granular roles and rules to control how people are making changes in your various Microsoft systems without actually granting the permissions. We provide continuous monitoring of change with those alerts. I talked about that. And then we also have both full forest recovery that's automated, and we have object and attribute recovery for those lesser impactful outages, but may be happening more frequently. Give us a shout, chaosoft.com/demo. We're happy to talk to you about your individual situation and how we can help you manage, monitor, and recover your Microsoft technologies. And with that, I will turn it back to our moderator.
Thanks, Bob. Great presentation. Such exciting stuff. And it just launched a week and a half ago, right? Immediate forest recovery?
That's right. Yeah, we actually announced at the Microsoft Ignite show this year. Yeah.
Perfect. So great timing. We do have time for just a couple of questions. I'm going to get this one in real quick. What's the difference between backup and backup planning? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, okay. So one of the issues that people have is that with Active Directory, there's a lot you could potentially back up. You may need as little as one domain controller being recovered for each one of your domains in your forest. It could be that you have 4 or 5 critical domain controllers and you want to back those up. It may be that you're trying to create a test lab versus a recovery. So we provide a backup planning built into the system so you can have different types of backups. One might be just for keeping a lab where you're testing other software. It's a mirror of your production Active Directory, but you're just using it for testing other products that you might be upgrading or whatever. But you may also have your forest recovery backup as well. And you may only run your forest recovery maybe once a week or twice a month, something like that. But the production to test environment for testing application you might want to do nightly. Now, that allows you then to execute those different types of backups of your directory, or different profiles if you want to think of it that way. And we also do the same thing with restore. We have restore plans. So you could have a restore plan for testing, a restore plan which includes all your domain controllers for eventual full recovery, not just maybe an initial recovery, but a full recovery. And so we provide all that planning built right into the product.
Great. And we're running short on time. We do have more questions. I'll make sure we get them over to you. And guys, go ahead. Any questions you have for Bob, get them in the Q&A box. We'll get them over to Bob. But before I let you go, Bob, can you talk again about how people get their hands on a demo and check it out for themselves and find out more information?
Yeah, so there are really 2 ways to get your hands on the software. One is if you don't want to install it, you don't want to, you just want to overview and discuss how you can work with us, you can go to chaosoft.com/demo. Very easy, and there's a form there you can fill out, and basically we'll set up a time to do a demo with you. If you want to trial the software, you're going to go to chaosoft.com/trial, and that will provide a download link that will allow you to have access to the software so you can try it in your own environment.
Oh, perfect both ways. Thank you so much, Bob. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks so much. It was fun.
Okay. Thanks again. And now we're on to our next speaker. And guys, by the way, he's with us live too, so get those questions in. And we're going to have somebody, he's going to be here at the end of the session to answer your questions. So now with us is Justin Augett. He's the VP of Marketing at Island. And Justin, please take it away.
Hey, well, thanks very much. I appreciate everybody's participation today. Great summit so far, and some great speakers so far. I've actually learned quite a bit, and I feel like this topic is going to be a great one to come right after Chaosoft. So today we're going to talk a little bit about disaster recovery, specifically talking about testing of disaster recovery. So the title of our presentation here is Put DR to the Test, Gaining a Peace of Mind with Comprehensive Testing Strategy. So what we mean by that is ultimately, if you've had disaster recovery in the last few years, or if you're new to the market, you've definitely seen exponential growth. You've seen that likely because many companies are much more focused on business continuity. So in other words, putting IT strategies in place to protect from business, from unplanned downtime to the business. It's really that simple. And when it comes to DR, the adoption of DR has really happened for 2 things. Number one, the impact of downtime's grown, the frequency of downtime has grown. I think there's no question that none of us want to be on the front page of our favorite IT site due to downtime or from ransomware or one of those things. But I think also the emergence and the ease of adoption of DR as a service, especially with providers like Island and our partners like Zerto, has really made disaster recovery available and accessible to companies of all sizes. Now, what's important here and why we're talking about testing today is, no solution, really operates well in a bubble, and disaster recovery is a great example of that. You've got to continue to test it on a regular basis to make sure that it's ready when you need it. So ultimately, that's what we're going to be talking about today. My name's Justin Augett. As was mentioned here, I look after product marketing and I look after communications here at Island. If you're not familiar with Island, we've been in the business of delivering cloud services for several decades now, believe it or not. We focus on data protection and disaster recovery. We've built a platform that is based on familiar technology like VMware, HPE Nimble, Cisco, Trend Micro, all proven technologies that you've likely used in the past or in your own data centers, all with a history of performance and security. And ultimately, when it comes to cloud services, we think that's what matters the most. We are a 4-time Zerto Cloud Partner of the Year winner. We're a 4-time leader in Gartner's Disaster Recovery as a Service Magic Quadrant before it was actually retired last year. So, to suffice to say, we've been in the business of delivering disaster recovery solutions in the cloud with partners like Zerto for quite a while now. The survey that we did over the last year around disaster recovery and testing gives us some great insights, not only about, essentially how to develop our solutions and create innovation for our current, future needs, but ultimately it shows us what to focus on. And so that's, part of the reason why we're talking about testing today. It's one of those things that goes really, goes kind of under the covers, and it's not always thought of as a priority. And so it's really important to take a look at it as part of a total solution. So let's quickly look at the agenda here. I'm going to go through a little bit of one-on-one stuff here, especially for you customers or folks on the call here that are our customers of disaster recovery solutions of some kind. There'll be a little bit of one-on-one. If you're not a DR customer, though, you might be surprised, by some of the drivers of DR adoption, especially in the last few years. Number 2, criticality of testing. So again, no solution operates well in a bubble, even cloud services, but especially disaster recovery. So you need to test. We're going to talk about why that is. And then 3, testing hurdles. What are some of the issues that customers regularly uncover when they eventually test their disaster recovery if they're not doing it on a set schedule? Okay, so why don't we get into the DR conversation? I'm going to jump right to the far right of the slide here, natural disasters. This is typically the topic that comes up when customers start talking about DR. Tornadoes and hurricanes, while devastating for sure, they're also often few and far between relative to other threats that could bring down your business. And, so things like accidental deletion, et cetera. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So why don't we talk a little bit about some of the results from the survey here? The accidental deletion was the first one that popped up. 37% of customers surveyed had suffered a data loss event due to accidental deletion, whether, it's fat fingers or a bit of an embarrassment, to the company to have that happen, to actually suffer, downtime as a result of that. So definitely something, simple yet can be a powerful problem if you are not prepared to solve it. Malicious insiders and departing employees. This is exactly what it sounds like. So disgruntled employees that, wreak havoc on hardware and software on their way out the door, right? So are you protected in that situation? Because, events like this can and do happen. Retention gaps, and this is really important. If you think about the sort of core capability of disaster recovery, it's around replication of a production environment, period, sort of end of story. So, the idea is to always have the most recent version of your data to recover to, and associated hardware, software, networking, et cetera. So that's what disaster recovery provides. Ultimately, what happens when customers are looking for a DR solution, they realize that backup is not enough, right? So I can recover my data, I can recover my files, but if I don't have hardware because it's failed, it's attacked, whatever, it's not helpful. So you really need that full disaster recovery site to really get back up and running. External security threats. So this, is exactly our favorite topic recently is ransomware, and so it's all over the news, and we've all seen it. So DR can provide, one piece of that recovery puzzle for sure, but also what customers many times will use is a DR environment as a safe way to test their production environment for holes, for vulnerabilities, for ransomware. So, this alongside data protection like backup, and air-gapped repositories, et cetera, provides ultimately the best protection possible. So it's a combination of things. And then, of course, it goes without saying, natural disasters, again, depending on where you live, in the world and your geography, they can and do happen. And so preparing early and often with testing, et cetera, is really what's recommended. When we talk about different disaster recovery solutions and deployments, over the years, we've seen many traditional, customers traditional route. They've got a second data center they own and they manage that data center. They put equipment in that data center, it needs to be maintained, et cetera. But, with the introduction of DR as a service in the cloud, it really renders traditional DR a bit inefficient, not only in terms of cost, but time spent, with employees, managing, essentially, or if you looked at as an insurance policy in case there's a problem with your production site and you're dedicating lots of resources to solving it. That all goes away for the most part when you move to the cloud for DR as a service. Here's a visual, and I guess we had a little problem here with the visual. Obviously, you can see it, so you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit. Production site is kind of in the middle there, and you can see the production site are all the different pieces and the elements that you would have in your data center. The traditional DR site, would be that offsite, replicated environment, hardware, software, data, et cetera, that's ready to go. If you could see this move in an animated way, you would see that ultimately moving to the cloud will improve everything from your costs to your management requirements to your flexibility and scalability of your resources, even your performance capabilities. So ultimately, when customers say, I need to do the digital transformation, I need to do the cloud first, they're talking about moving out of the data center. And so moving to the cloud, especially for disaster recovery, great first step for that digital transformation. Again, we're having problems with our animation here, and that's fine. But what I'm trying to do here is put an exclamation point on the differences between do it yourself and do it in the cloud from a cost, time, complexity perspective. There's really not even a comparison to be made. If you are doing it yourself, the cost, the time, the effort, the complexity, here is, again, it's all pales in comparison to what you can experience in the cloud. And really relenting your, sort of the mundane maintenance administrative tasks that you may be spending time on and move it over to a service provider. Criticality of testing. So let's talk about this. Before we talk about DR in general, testing, we want to talk about, what successful customers have seen, and that is you can deploy DR, you're testing it regularly, you're ready. 96% of companies with a trusted DR plan were able to survive ransomware attacks. So big numbers. Look at this as a goal. This is the goal. If you are going to become a ransomware victim at some point, unfortunately, it's the reality of the world we live in. Best to prepare now. Here's a question that we ask. Thinking of your most recent test, what are your, so what's your response? And so you can see here that well more than 50% here did not feel that their recovery plan was adequate. So what's that mean? It means that I've deployed DR, but in the event of a failover, I may not have either the right, capabilities on the DR side. Has it matched the growth in my current my production data center? Lots of different reasons that it could not be, in a place where you're ready to actually fail over and move your production to that DR site. That's ultimately what you're talking about is in the event of a failover, your DR site becomes production environment. Testing hurdles, so other things that we overcome, through testing. First, let's take a look at this. So what this chart says is that 50% of your, 50% of customers typically test annually or less. Now, you think about what happens during a year in terms of workloads, in terms of capacity and resource planning and management, performance changes, security changes. You have to make sure that your DR site is ready for those changes so that when you do need to fail over, it's ready and it's capable of performing and meeting expectations the way that your production environment does. It's really that simple. Here are some of the things that get uncovered, and we're going to go through these in, a little bit more depth here. First, personnel and planning. Many customers realize, hey, I actually don't have a plan. I've got this great solution in place. I love my vendor, I love my software, but I don't actually have a plan. Maybe I lack task ownership in the event that we have a problem we've got to respond to. Maybe I have a staff shortage. So these are all things that end up popping up, during a regular test, right? Limited validation. So the big one here is, oh, wow, I forgot to cover that workload. That workload's actually not being protected. Again, so if you're testing less than 50%, 50% of our customers, of the customers in the survey, were testing less than 50% annually. 50% were testing annually or less is what I should say. They may not be uncovering the fact that they have workloads that are newer workloads or are not being protected, and so they're vulnerable to those failover situations. Lengthy recovery failback, another very common problem that gets uncovered through testing. Network problems, VM config problems, these are not the kinds of things you want to deal with, when you're having potentially disaster within your IT systems, your business. And then the other thing that should be looked at is the cost, right? So surprise, surprise, an unbelievable cost that I didn't expect to happen when I was going through this failover, especially if I'm doing it for a long period of time. So, getting ahead of these things ahead of time can really help you set expectations and be ready for, your IT environment. Capacity challenges, this is along the same line of customers that are saying, I look at backup as my VR. If you have a hardware failure, backup won't help, right? So it's all about making sure that you have the right capacity and resources ready, you right systems ready, to fail over, depending on the kind of data loss downtime situation that you experience. Our partnership success. So in this case, we're going to be highlighting, a number of companies that we work with. Zerto being one of our biggest disaster recovery partners. With them, we've built out, a very robust and comprehensive management system that allows us to perform these testing scenarios and simulations regularly, frequently. It's really up to the business to decide what makes the most sense. How often does your production environment change? But we make it very simple through our secure cloud console. You can see literally all the data that you potentially need to see. Again, back to that animation problem here, but what I wanted to show you is within the console, beyond testing, we can also show you billing, we can show you performance, we can show you security, we can show you backups, we can show you basically all of the different control mechanisms that you would experience and look to have in a traditional on-premises environment, but in the cloud. When we built this out, it was all about replicating that experience as well as can be expected, in an environment where you're not actually able to physically touch the hardware and software itself. So that's part of the goal that we've achieved here with Island and with Zerto. Framework for success. When you look at the different types of ways to deploy a solution, many of our customers want the self-service. They can, they have folks that are on point to take the reign of command and whatever steps they need to take to do a disaster recovery, failover, failback, to manage that. Other customers say, look, I just want you guys to do the whole thing for me and take ownership of it, take responsibility of it. So we offer what we call autopilot managed recovery. So it's end-to-end service levels, all in pricing. We own the failover and the failback. When it comes to DR in general, again, if you're not a DR customer, the idea is around risk reduction. If you are a DR customer and, you're looking to move to the cloud, now we're talking about money. Now we're talking about driving revenue, repurposing, some of the talent you must have focused on DR, to repurpose and focus them on, revenue generating activities and other competitive advantage type activities, application development, things like that. But one of the ways that we get our customers up and running in the beginning is to do an assessment. So we have a product called Island Catalyst. It's a free download. You can go through and use the software at your leisure to size your environment, to test performance, to try out in different data center locations, to understand whether certain workloads make sense, and to decide whether disaster recovery in the cloud, especially with Island, is right for you. I think we've got some questions, but I know we are a little short on time. Let me know if there's any questions here.
We do have time for questions, so definitely. So thank you so much, Justin. Great presentation. It's always so great research, and we definitely look into see if we can get those animation issues fixed on replay. So let's go ahead and start with this question. How do you compare, and this is what everyone's going to ask always, how do you compare with Microsoft?
Yeah, well, we love Microsoft. There's no problems there. We do. But the reality is that, when you talk about a hyperscaler like a Microsoft, like an Amazon, like a Google, they have an ecosystem full of services that are great for application development. But when it comes to actually having, a disaster recovery environment, usually it's uniquely sized. Usually there's specific security requirements. The bottom line is usually there's an individuality, there's a customization that takes place. So when you look at a smaller provider like an Island, we have the resources to literally build a DR solution that fits your unique budget, your unique needs, your unique geographic and industry compliance. So, what we would say is if you want an out-of-the-box solution, you want the pie off the shelf, Microsoft and Amazon, all those work great. If you want, a custom build that says, happy birthday, Johnny, something a little bit more unique to you, you'd want to look at Island, that kind of thing.
Talking talking about custom, we've actually gotten a couple questions. How does the pricing work? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and we're all, I've worked at a few companies, and I know pricing is always the question with the cloud. The way that we price is actually extremely simple, and that's by design. It's all-inclusive. Simple as that. So let's use Zerto as an example. We provide the end-to-end software, the Zerto software. So you have your client software, and we have the software in our data centers. Storage, compute, et cetera, is all inclusive, one price per gigabyte. And then you have an additional cost for burst. So the burst would be, a presumed price up front that you can use for testing, for example. But ultimately, you're paying for what you use. If you were to go through the exercise of going through a price with us, you'd say, wow, that's much, much, much less than what you'd see with a Microsoft or Amazon, because we're not billing based on allocation, we're based on usage. So you have a reservation price, and then you bill based on your usage, and usage would be a failover, would be a testing, a simulation, et cetera. So a much, much more efficient model for something like VR, which you're hopefully not going to use more than, maybe you're going to use it once a year. Hopefully you're not going to use it at all.
Great. And then I know you talked a little bit about this already, but please talk again about that, about how people can download and get that software in the system to figure out what they need.
Yeah. Real quickly, let me just go back to this link here, iland.com, Iland Catalyst. So one of the big challenges in the cloud is making sure that your applications are covered from a storage perspective, from a performance perspective, from a security perspective. In the cloud, you have bandwidth, you have throttling issues, you have network issues, things like that you wonder about before you move to the cloud. So Iland Catalyst is free download software that allows you to test to make sure that the performance in one of our data centers, we have 11 data centers around the world, you can choose to test in any of them, and you can determine whether, disaster recovery makes sense for you. It's really that simple. You can do that before you commit to us or even before you do a trial with us. So, and if you were to go and use that download, pull that data from your own environment, it allows us to, put together quotes, put together different scenarios for you that you can really, take and analyze it, at your own convenience without having to go through, lengthy phone calls and meetings and demonstrations and all that. It's really one of those self-service things we can use.
And again, I know there's so much out there, but if you had one piece, because you deal with this day in and out, you know the research, you know everything that's going on, one piece of advice, what would your one piece of parting advice be for a reader? Oh,
yeah. Well, look, ultimately there's lots of different clouds out there, and if you're in my age bracket, you experienced, data centers full of different companies, storage arrays and servers. We got this whole idea of heterogeneous environments, in a data center. The same is quickly becoming true in the cloud. You go to the cloud that makes the most sense for your specific use case. Again, if I need to develop a new application, I'm going to look at Amazon or Microsoft or some, a company with all the services. If I want something that's, going to specialize on VR, or it's going to specialize on something for VMware, for example, I'm going to look at a cloud for that. Multi-cloud world is real, and it's real for a reason. It's as simple as that. No, there's no cloud out there that can really do every single use case perfectly. So I absolutely promote the multi-cloud world.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for being with us. We'll get the rest of the questions over to you guys. If you have any more questions for Justin, put them in the console. We'll get them over. Thank you so much, Justin. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Great. And now we're going to move on to our third and final presentation. We're so thrilled to have him with us. It's one of our favorite companies. They always have great things to show us. So we've got a presentation with Justin Lawyer. He's Director of Technical Sales at Metallic, and after his presentation, we have a live Q&A with Zach Brigman. He's the Senior Product Marketing Manager. So, Justin, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Justin Lauer, and I'm the Director of Technical Sales Strategy at Metallic. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the benefits of data management and data protection that's delivered through a software as a service delivery model. one of the big reasons that software as a service delivery models for things that we were traditionally consuming through on-premises software is so attractive is that, frankly, all of us are moving to this now. There's been a huge uptick at the pace of cloud adoption, and this was really spurred on even more through the pandemic. What we're seeing now is almost 80% of enterprises will have doubled the pace at which they're adopting through the end of 2021. So really all of this talk of digital transformation that's been happening, people are putting plans together. Well, those plans aren't just plans anymore. They're turning into tangible, actionable items, and people are really exploring multiple different cloud models, software as a service being one of them. The reason that this is so attractive in the data management or data protection as a service space is, quite frankly, the risks are high, right? Cybercrime is rising at an alarming pace. These cyber criminals are operating this as a true business, right? A multi-billion-dollar business is that. What we're seeing is customers are really resource constrained. They're either constrained through budget or constrained through skill set to get to the cloud fast or secure their environments in a proper fashion. And what we're seeing is because most organizations are choosing a hybrid approach, they're actually having to worry about doing this in two different types of environments, right? The traditional on-premises environment, as well as the new cloud world, and sometimes consuming other as-a-service production workloads, things like Office 365 or Salesforce, for example. This also kind of translates into kind of what we have to talk about as far as what shared responsibility means in a as-a-service delivery model, right? So I kind of talked about not having to worry so much about what you traditionally operate on premises, right? So gone are the days where you have to worry about deploying, patching, hardening, servers, infrastructure, software, right? That's all owned and operated by the as-a-service vendor, right? So in the world of Metallic data protection as a service, we would be the platform operator handling everything you see here on the slide in gray. As the consumer of that service, you really only worry about operating it, right? You'd worry about your initial configuration, setting up your plans and policies. You'd worry about essentially your level of authentication, whether you're going to use two-factor or some secure password technologies, single sign-on. You would provide kind of that level of operation. And then ultimately, when you're in operational mode, running your daily backups, you'd basically handle any sort of reporting that you want to run or alerting that you need to be aware of, right? You would set up your alerts. And then you'd kind of monitor it, and when it's time to do a restore, you'd go in and do a restore. So basically, customers' only concern would be the section in purple. So this shared responsibility model kind of alleviates the need to worry about things we traditionally would worry about as customers and really focus on the things that bring you value, right? Am I protecting my data? How am I doing against the commitments I've made with SLAs, RPOs, RTOs, and then when I want to do a restore, right, I'm able to go in and just worry about what type of restore I'm driving and is that completing successfully. So the shared responsibility model is kind of key on understanding and unlocking the value of any as-a-service delivery model, but particularly in the data protection space, where really what we really want to be concerned about are good backups and flexible recoveries. And that actually kind of brings us to what it is we're delivering through Metallic as far as feature by feature kind of breakdown of the portfolio. So we are one of the leaders in this space. We probably have the broadest set of protection within the data protection, data management as a service space. And we kind of look at our service catalog and break it up into individual sections. So we've got our SaaS app section, which kind of really from a logical standpoint makes sense, right? You often are operating a SaaS production environment, and it makes sense to architect and tailor a SaaS data protection environment to handle that. So things like Office 365, Dynamics 365, Salesforce, all SaaS delivery models on the production side that we can marry nicely with our SaaS data management data protection model. We also do the same thing for what we call our hybrid cloud portfolio. And these are things that traditionally might be found running in data center, things like VMs, containers, databases, file and object, unstructured data, but also now live in the modern cloud-based world. So things like Azure, AWS workloads, cloud databases, even cloud object storage. All of these things protected within our hybrid cloud portfolio. So whether that is an on-premises VM or an in-cloud VM, we have the ability to protect it. And then we also tie in and bring in our highly secured air-gapped cloud storage, right? So you can ultimately think of us providing the engine to handle all of the data protection, the policy management, and then providing you a storage repository for that. We also bring in endpoint protection, which has been an interesting one to watch over this whole work from home era. We've actually seen a giant resurgence in endpoint protection now with lots of corporate assets working outside of the office and kind of floating around space to space. Companies want to be able to protect the data that might not be making it back to centralized data repositories or just have the ability to remotely wipe a device if needed. And then what's nice about our platform is if you subscribe to a single one of these services, we include Active Directory protection for both Azure AD and on-prem AD, absolutely included with any subscription. So it's kind of a nice thing that we do as well. I would also like to take a point and mention a bit more about security, right? So I mentioned we have an offering that brings storage into play. And so with all of our SaaS app portfolio, we include storage. We include Metallic Cloud Storage Service, which is our highly secured air-gapped storage service. For any of the hybrid workloads, you have the option to either bring your own storage or bring Metallic Cloud Storage Service in as well. And what's nice here is you can think of the Metallic control plane being completely separated and completely isolated from the data plane, which is Metallic Cloud Storage Service. So this is essentially an air gap that we provide to protect against any sort of cyber attack, ransomware attack. It basically provides immutability for the data. And this is all operated with zero trust access controls, right? So our entire operational model is built around a zero trust methodology. And what's interesting is we've kind of doubled down on that by going out and getting some of the most rigorous certifications you can. So we have SOC 2, Type 2, ISO 27001, and then we are the only vendor in this space to have FedRAMP High ready status, right? So we've gone through that, which is a very stringent certification. It's over 400 different unique attributes you have to basically be certified and blessed on. To bring your platform up into that. So that allows us to offer Metallic both as a commercial offering as well as a government cloud offering as well. What's also interesting and new is we just launched our Security IQ piece of the Metallic portfolio. So this is a new capability just launched that is essentially a monitoring management insight and outcome tool, all built around security that is part of the Metallic platform. So the Security IQ dashboard will appear in your tenant, and it will basically look at kind of what you have configured, and it will ultimately provide you insights and even sort of a health score on the state of your environment and the security of it, right? So you'll be able to come in here and see some real-time metrics on critical events, anomalous activities, even potential ransomware-related activities, and it will actually recommend some actionable items, particularly around recovering if and when there's an anomalous activity to be discovered. So if we look a little bit deeper into this, we can actually see what the Security IQ dashboard looks like. So ultimately, you'll see up in the upper corner our security posture score. So what we've done here is we've taken a list of best practices and made sure that you have the ability to acknowledge and implement them. So this really basically creates a score based on some of the existing controls in the platform and things that you can turn on and enable that are even additive to that. You can go down your list and accept and implement them. And basically the security score kind of captures what you've activated, what you have in place, what's turned on. This is really helpful for customers who want to make sure they are kind of not just operating in a secure manner, but can actually show a tangible result and kind of like have a score or report they can print off and hand leadership or an auditor, say, here's all the things we've done to make sure we're protected and secure. In addition, Security IQ is also monitoring for anomalous activities. So any sort of job or event that would be deemed anomalous based on kind of a standard level of behavior would be tracked here. And then you have the ability to go in and look at those conditions. So if an anomalous condition showed up, you'd be alerted on it, you'd come here and you'd dive in and be able to kind of understand better if that truly was something you need to explore further, or if it's just an event condition that was expected and you can clear the anomaly. And then going one step deeper, we offer the unusual file activity tracking, which really monitors file system level trending. And really what this does, it will basically tip you off and suggest that you might have a ransomware incident that may need, obviously some recovery. And so the key with that is going and finding the exact point in time to recover to. So if we go deeper into the unusual file activity, what this really does is it monitors your trending in the background to establish normal baseline. And when something deviates from the baseline, you'll be alerted. And what we'll be able to do is tell you, here's the point in time where that anomaly took place. And if you believe that you have to recover to that point in time, you'll have the ability to either recover at the file level or as an entire virtual machine, for example, and roll back to a pre-anomaly state. And this is really beneficial because there's two things that are key to getting out of any of these cyber incident states. It's one, having a good, valid backup to recover to. And that's what the whole concept of a control plane in the cloud with an air-gapped immutable copy in the cloud provides you. But then secondarily, you need a good point in time that's known to be pre the anomalous condition to recover to. And that's really what we're providing here with deep insights that Security IQ provides into the file activity reporting. And then as you see down here, we can provide dates and times that this happens, and you'll have the ability to take action and basically kick off a file or a VM level recovery to get back to a good state. Our customers are definitely living the benefits of all of the great security we've implemented here, right? So whether that's just having more confidence that your data is secured and able to be there in the event you need to recover, it's reducing, backup times, or it's a full-fledged rethinking of your overall data protection strategy. We've had huge success in bringing customers benefit with their adoption of a data management as a service platform. What we've also seen is just industry-wide, we've kind of become the gold standard in this as far as data management, data protection as a service, whether it's, winning awards or just having the breadth of coverage from the edge, and endpoints all the way to data center and then into the cloud, right? We're really extending our footprint here. So maturity of workload, breadth of workload, flexibility in, backup model, storage model, recovery model has really allowed us to kind of be kind of the leader in this space. And what I would basically say and leave it with is, we offer a full-fledged environment that you can kind of get your hands on and start trialing today. So if you go to metallic.io/trial, you can register and you'll immediately have access to an environment where you can have the breadth of that service catalog to go out and test and try out. And I would invite you to do that, check out the trial and kind of experience what Metallic has to offer. Thank you.
Great presentation from Justin. And now I'm thrilled to have with us, we've got Zach Brigman. He's the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Metallic, a Commvault venture. Zach, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. We do have some questions. Before we do that, I just want to say congratulations on the launch of Security IQ. It just launched October 28th, right? Just a couple weeks ago.
Yes, and thank you for having us. Yeah, exciting stuff. Just launched recently our new security capabilities for early detection, and as Justin had mentioned, obviously, ransomware recovery capabilities pulled into our product. So really provides a lot of benefits to our current Metallic customers. So really excited to get that one out in the wild.
Great. Well, we definitely have some questions. Guys, if you have any more, put them in. If we don't have time, we're going to get them over to him. So just go ahead and put them in now. First question, though, what Zero Trust access features are in place? So good question.
Yes, and that's one that definitely a buzzword now in terms of Zero Trust and a lot of practicality. We refer to it as Zero Trust or least privilege model, and that's everything around really preventing unwarranted access to data. So multi-factor authentication, Zero Trust access controls can be role-based access controls as well as single sign-on. So everything that you build in the product in terms of making sure that access doesn't get into unwarranted hands. We also have a number of features that really come in at the application level, things like multi-authorization that really prevent a restore or backup job from running without an additional approval from another member, a privileged member of the team. And then obviously what we do at the application level from a hardening approach using kind of a DevSecOps approach to how we build the software, making sure that we adhere to best practices, whether that be ISO, SOC 2 Type 2, FedRAMP High, really incorporating them into the product as we build our product to make sure that we're adhering to the best requirements. So definitely a buzzword, a lot of practicality, and it comes in at multiple different levels, both at the application layer and then really foundationally how we build the product.
Great. Here's a good question. Are Metallic backups immutable?
Yep, so that is a great question. In terms of, I think Justin touched upon this a little bit in the presentation as well, really talking about when we speak about the cloud, it's that virtual air gapping between environments. So it really comes into play for two reasons. It's the preservation and the air gapping of data to a separate security domain, making sure that's isolated from your source and production environments. So God forbid you experience a breach, it is stored in a separate security domain, so that instance that has affected your production environment can't leak to also infect your backups where they can't be tampered, altered, or deleted. And then it's also the service, right? Having that as a separate service, a separate utility off premises that you can go ahead and run your backup and restore operations independent of obviously your source or production environment. So that virtual air gapping comes into flavor in two specific use cases there.
Can you talk a little bit about how Metallic handles data residency? That's the question.
Yes,
Metallic
Sure. So when we speak about data residency, it really is in regards to being able to have access to data in specific regions. So really comes into play when we speak with a global customer or a customer that has an international footprint. And really the way that Metallic handles that is we geolocate user and really provision storage based upon the nearest Azure data center. So customers have always full autonomy to go in and choose one or multiple regions around the world and associate their users with the regions. That really helps ensure that their data backup is stored in those locations that meet the data residency and compliance requirements. So we leverage Azure data centers in order to go ahead and achieve that.
Okay, and I know your URL is metallic.io. Can you talk, and I know Justin talked about this a little bit, but just real quickly, how can people get their hands on it again? Can you reiterate that?
Sure. So, we encourage everyone to go check out metallic.io/trial, or you can go to our page, metallic.io, and click the trial button. We do have 30-day free trials. Go there. Feel free to try really any one of our products for any one of our environments that we protect. Some folks prefer to have a little bit more of a guided experience, so always feel free to engage us as well. Happy to help if you're looking for a specific POC or a specific scenario and would prefer to chat with us prior to. Always happy to hop on the line here and see how we can best assist.
Guys, if you have any questions, go ahead, get them in the system. We'll get them over to Zach. And then finally, Zach, again, you work with us day in, day out. You're helping people. What is your parting advice, like one piece of advice you would have?
Sure. I think being a proactive, kind of having a proactive lens to data protection is definitely key. There really isn't a lot that's sexy about data backup until it's a point in time to recover. But just knowing, your environment, what your data state looks like, the areas that are protected that aren't, focusing on filling the gap. We've seen customers be really successful by taking a proactive approach as opposed to being a reactive one. So given the current climate with ransomware attacks and the growing threat of insiders, we really just encourage everyone to take a look at their data strategies, data security strategies holistically, and really try to peel back the layers and understand where areas of improvement are, and really, as you move forward, the areas that you could definitely enrich.
Thank you so much for being with us live, Zach. We appreciate you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks. And now it's time to announce the winner of the Surface Pro 8. The winner of the Surface Pro 8 today in our random drawing is Eric Lee from Penn State Harrisburg. Eric, you're the winner of our prize. Somebody on our team, most likely me, will be sending you an email within the next day or so. Please keep an eye out, look in your spam folder just to make sure, so that you make sure you get that email and we can send you your prize. So thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You're going to get your replay email again in the next couple of days. Make sure you take the survey at the end. Give us your honest feedback so we can keep doing these summits for you and make sure we're giving you what you want. And thank you again so much, Chaosoft, Island, and Metallic, for sponsoring this and allowing us to bring you this summit. We really appreciate you. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. See you soon.